Moon Shine Marina. A wild, wacky, weird Florida mystery. Chapter 1. Gumbo Malone was trying to figure out why his boat's bilge pump sounded like it was gargling marbles when Cletus McCready showed up at his slip carrying a gallon jug of something that looked like it belonged in a chemistry lab rather than a marine repair kit. "Got your message about the engine trouble," Cletus said, stepping aboard without waiting for an invitation. He was about 60, with the kind of permanent sunburn that suggested he'd given up on sunscreen sometime during the Reagan administration, and arms that looked like they'd been assembled from spare tractor parts. "Heard you saying she's been running rough." "Rough doesn't cover it. Sounds like she's trying to shake herself apart every time I hit the throttle." Cletus nodded with the sagely wisdom of someone who'd spent 40 years listening to dying engines. "Probably carbon buildup. See it all the time with these older Mercs. Good news is, I got something that'll fix her right up." He held up the jug like a preacher, presenting holy water. The liquid inside was clear as vodka and just as suspicious. "What is that?" "My special engine cleaner. Family recipe, passed down from my granddaddy. Works better than anything you can buy at West Marine, and it's all natural. Environmentally friendly too." "Natural how?" "Made from corn, mostly. Some other stuff. Secret ingredients." Cletus unscrewed the engine cowling with practiced efficiency and started pouring the mystery liquid into various engine components. "You just let this sit for about 20 minutes, then fire her up. She'll run like she's brand new." The smell hit Gumbo about 3 seconds after Cletus started pouring. It was sharp and clean with an underlying sweetness that tickled the back of his throat in a way that seemed very familiar. "Cletus, that smells like quality, that's what it smells like. Now you just let that percolate through the system while I check your fuel lines." 20 minutes later, Cletus had Gumbo fire up the engine. The mercury outboard coughed once, then roared to life with the kind of smooth, powerful purr that Gumbo hadn't heard since the day he bought the boat 5 years ago. "Well, I'll be damned," Gumbo said, listening to the engine hum. "What did you do to it?" "Told you, special cleaner. Gets all that carbon and gunk out of the system, lets the engine breathe proper." Cletus wiped his hands on a rag that looked like it had been white sometime during the Carter administration. "She'll run smooth as silk now. Just remember to bring her in every 6 months for a maintenance treatment." "How much do I owe you?" "50 for the service call, 20 for the cleaner. That's 70 even." Gumbo paid him in cash, watching as Cletus packed up his tools with the methodical efficiency of a man who'd made the same movements 10,000 times. After the mechanic left, Gumbo went back to admiring his newly purring engine. That's when he noticed Cletus had left the jug of special cleaner sitting on the dock. Gumbo picked it up, studying the clear liquid inside. The smell was even stronger now that the cap was off. He found a clean coffee cup in his galley, poured a small amount of the cleaner into it, and held it up to the light. It looked exactly like moonshine. He sniffed it. Smelled like moonshine. Against his better judgment, he touched his tongue to it. Tasted exactly like high-proof corn liquor with a faint chemical aftertaste. "Well," Gumbo said to no one in particular, "that explains why the engine sounds so happy." He spent the rest of the afternoon running diagnostic tests on his engine, which continued to perform like it had been possessed by the spirit of a NASCAR racer. The throttle response was crisp, the idle was smooth, and there was none of the hesitation or rough running that had plagued him for months. Whatever Cletus was using as engine cleaner, it worked. The question was whether using what appeared to be moonshine as a marine maintenance product was legal, advisable, or completely insane. Probably all three, Gumbo decided. He was contemplating whether to call Cletus and ask about the recipe when his phone rang. Eddie Torino's name showed up on the screen. "Gumbo, you busy?" Eddie ran the marina where Gumbo kept his boat, a collection of docks and slips that catered mostly to local fishermen and the occasional tourist who didn't know any better. He was a practical man who'd seen enough Florida weird to not be surprised by much, but there was something in his voice that suggested he'd hit a new threshold of confusion. "Just finished getting my engine serviced. What's up? You know anything about boat owners getting drunk off engine fumes?" "Come again?" "I got 3 complaints today from wives saying their husbands came home from the marina, acting tipsy. No beer cans, no liquor bottles, just happy guys who smell like mechanics and can't quite walk straight." Gumbo looked at the jug of special engine cleaner sitting on his deck. "Eddie, these guys get their engines serviced by Cletus McCready." "How'd you know that?" "Lucky guess. Give me an hour, and I'll come by your office. I think I might know what's going on." After hanging up, Gumbo took another small taste of the engine cleaner, just to confirm his suspicions. The burn was immediate and potent, the kind of heat that came from alcohol content somewhere north of 150 proof. Cletus wasn't just using moonshine as engine cleaner, he was using really good moonshine. Which raised the question of where a boat mechanic in Cedar Key was getting access to premium corn liquor, and whether he knew what he was actually using on people's engines. Gumbo sealed the jug and set it aside for later analysis. His engine continued to purr like a contented cat, completely unaware that it had just been treated with what was probably enough alcohol to intoxicate a small party. "Just another day in paradise," Gumbo muttered, though even by Cedar Key standards, this was pushing the boundaries of normal. His phone buzzed with a text from Meredith Patterson, one of his regular clients who lived in the waterfront neighborhood. "Engine running amazing after Cletus worked on it. Whatever he used, it's magic. Also, why does my husband keep giggling when he checks the boat? Should I be worried?" Gumbo typed back, "Probably not. We'll explain later. In the meantime, maybe don't let him operate the boat until tomorrow." He looked at his own engine, still humming away with mechanical contentment, and wondered how many other boat owners in Cedar Key were currently enjoying the unintended side effects of Cletus McCready's family recipe engine treatment. The answer, he suspected, was going to be both amusing and complicated in ways that only Florida could manage. His engine gave a particularly satisfied purr, as if agreeing with him. At least someone was happy about the situation. Chapter 2. Eddie Torino's office looked like a filing cabinet had exploded inside a bait shop, with maritime charts covering every wall and enough coffee-stained paperwork to qualify as a fire hazard. Eddie himself was sitting behind a desk that had probably been salvaged from a shipwreck, looking at a notebook full of complaints with the expression of a man who'd been trying to solve a math problem using only his forehead. "It started about 2 weeks ago," Eddie said, not bothering with pleasantries. "Mrs. Henderson came in, asking why her husband was so cheerful all the time. Said he used to complain about everything: the boat, the weather, the price of fuel. Now he just smiles and hums sea shanties." "That doesn't sound terrible." "It wouldn't be, except he's also been forgetting where he parked the boat. Twice he came home without it, said he must have left it somewhere but couldn't quite remember where. She found it both times tied up at random docks around town." Gumbo pulled out the jug of Cletus's engine cleaner and set it on Eddie's desk. "You ever see Cletus using this stuff?" Eddie picked up the jug, unscrewed the cap, and took a sniff. His eyebrows went up so far they nearly joined his hairline. "Is this what I think it is?" "Depends on what you think it is. If you're thinking moonshine, then yes." "Jesus. How long has Cletus been cleaning engines with moonshine?" "Good question. How long has he been working around here?" "About 6 months. Took over from old Walter Kowalski when he retired to Boca." Eddie set the jug down like it might explode. "You're telling me every boat Cletus has serviced is running on alcohol-based engine cleaner?" "That's my theory. And judging by the fumes, Anyone working on or around those engines is getting a contact high. That would explain Bob Martinez. What about Bob Martinez? Retired Coast Guard captain, very by-the-book guy. Last week I caught him on his yacht at 2 in the afternoon, singing, "What Shall We Do with a Drunken Sailor?" at the top of his lungs. When I asked if he was okay, he said he'd never felt better in his life and offered to teach me the harmony parts. Gumbo made a note in the small, waterproof notebook he'd started carrying after realizing that Florida Weird required documentation. How many boats has Cletus serviced? Off the top of my head, maybe 40 or 50. He's good, fast, and cheap. Word got around. And how many of those boat owners have been acting strange? Eddie consulted his notebook. I got complaints or comments from maybe a dozen people. But that's just the ones who said something. Could be more who are enjoying the side effects and keeping quiet about it. Before Gumbo could respond, the office door opened, and Mrs. Delilah Henderson walked in wearing a tracksuit that could have been used as a warning beacon for low-flying aircraft. She was carrying a casserole dish and had the kind of determined expression that suggested she was on a mission from a higher power. "Eddie, I brought you some tuna casserole. You look thin." She set the dish on his desk, nearly knocking over the jug of moonshine. "Oh, hello, Gumbo. Solving mysteries?" "Trying to. Mrs. Henderson, Eddie tells me your husband's been acting unusual lately." "Unusual?" Harold's been downright delightful. For the first time in 43 years of marriage, he's stopped complaining about the water temperature, the fish not biting, and my driving. Yesterday, he told me I looked pretty. She paused. I got suspicious immediately. Has he been working on his boat? Every day since Cletus fixed that terrible knocking sound in the engine. Harold says it runs like a dream now. He spends hours just sitting there with the engine running, listening to it purr, he says. She sniffed the air. Is that alcohol I smell? Engine cleaner, Eddie said quickly. Smells like the bourbon my daddy used to make in the basement. Very distinctive scent. Mrs. Henderson looked at the jug with interest. Harold's boat smells exactly like that now. I thought he'd taken up drinking, but he swears he hasn't touched a drop. He probably hasn't, Gumbo said. At least not intentionally. What do you mean? Mrs. Henderson, when's the last time you spent time around Harold's boat while the engine was running? Oh, I don't go on the boat. I get seasick. But I visited him at the dock last Tuesday to bring him lunch. How'd you feel afterward? She thought about it. Well, now that you mention it, I did feel unusually relaxed. And I may have giggled at something that wasn't particularly funny. Harold said I should come by more often because I seemed so happy. Eddie and Gumbo exchanged looks. Mrs. Henderson, Gumbo said carefully, I think your husband's been getting second-hand drunk off his engine fumes. That's ridiculous. You can't get drunk from engine fumes. You can, if the engine's been cleaned with 180 proof moonshine. Mrs. Henderson stared at him, then at the jug, then back at him. You're serious? Completely. Well, she sat down in Eddie's spare chair without asking permission. That explains why Harold wanted to buy an even bigger boat. Said we should get one with a cabin so we could spend more time appreciating the craftsmanship. Gumbo's phone buzzed with another text, this one from Bob Martinez. Engine still running perfect. Best maintenance decision I ever made. Thinking of hiring Cletus to service my whole fleet. Have 3 boats, all need work. Can you give me his number? How many boats does Bob Martinez have? Gumbo asked. 3, Eddie said. Classic yacht, fishing boat, and a little runabout for puttering around. If Cletus services all 3 with his special cleaner, Bob's going to be the happiest man in Florida. He's already pretty happy. Yesterday, he invited me onto his yacht to admire the engine. Spent an hour explaining the virtues of proper maintenance while we both stood in the engine compartment with it running. Eddie paused. Come to think of it, I did feel pretty good afterward. Thought it was just the satisfaction of seeing a well-maintained boat. Or the moonshine fumes. Or the moonshine fumes, Eddie agreed. The office phone rang. Eddie answered it, listened for a moment, then held the receiver away from his ear as enthusiastic singing came through the speaker. He hung up. That was Tommy Rodriguez. Says he's at the fuel dock singing with Harold Henderson, and they wanted me to know the fuel prices are very reasonable, and the weather is beautiful, and life is good. They're both at the fuel dock. Right next to each other, apparently. Both running their engines because they sound so nice. Gumbo stood up. I think we should go check this out. The fuel dock was at the far end of the marina, a long wooden structure where boats could pull up to fill their tanks. It was usually quiet, except during busy weekends, but today it sounded like someone was hosting an impromptu concert. Harold Henderson and Tommy Rodriguez were standing on their respective boats, both with engines running, harmonizing on what sounded like a bastardized version of Beyond the Sea. They were slightly off-key, but making up for it with enthusiasm. 3 other boat owners were gathered nearby, listening and clapping along. None of them seemed concerned about the strong smell of alcohol-tinged exhaust fumes, or the fact that they were all swaying slightly in unison. Gentlemen, Eddie called out, maybe we should shut down those engines. Why would we do that? Harold asked, his face flushed with what could have been sun exposure or intoxication or both. They're running beautifully. Listen to that purr. Harold, your wife's worried about you. Delilah worries too much. Tell her I'm fine. Better than fine. I'm fantastic. He gestured expansively at his boat. You know what Cletus told me? He said this engine's good for another 20 years with proper maintenance. 20 years, Eddie. That's longer than my first marriage lasted. Tommy Rodriguez, who was about 50 and looked like he'd spent most of his life either on boats or thinking about boats, nodded enthusiastically. My outboard hasn't run this smooth since it was new. Cletus is a miracle worker. I'm telling everyone at the yacht club about his special cleaner. How long have you been running your engines? Gumbo asked. Maybe an hour. Tommy checked his watch, squinting at it like the numbers were doing something unexpected. Or possibly 2 hours. Time really flies when you're enjoying quality marine engineering. And you're all feeling okay. Never better, Harold said. In fact, I feel so good I'm thinking about taking the boat out. Beautiful day for a cruise. Absolutely not, Eddie said firmly. Nobody's taking any boats out until we figure out what's going on. What's to figure out? Cletus fixed our engines, they run great, we're happy. This is the American dream, Eddie. Gumbo walked closer to Harold's boat, testing the air. The fumes were strong enough to make his eyes water slightly, and he could feel a pleasant warmth spreading through his chest after just a few breaths. Eddie, we need to shut these engines down before someone decides drunk boating sounds like a good idea. I'm not drunk, Harold protested. I haven't had a drop of alcohol. Technically true, Gumbo said. But your engine has, and it's sharing. It took another 20 minutes to convince the assembled boat owners to shut down their engines and disperse. Harold and Tommy were particularly resistant, arguing that they were just appreciating fine marine maintenance, and there was nothing wrong with that. As the group finally broke up, Gumbo noticed more boats around the marina were running their engines for no apparent reason. The sound of perfectly tuned outboards filled the air, along with the distinctive smell of Cletus McCready's special engine cleaner. This is bigger than I thought, Eddie said quietly. Yeah. Question is, does Cletus know what he's doing, or is this the world's most accidental moonshine distribution network? Only one way to find out. I need to talk to Cletus. Good luck with that. He's probably at his shop making more of that magic engine cleaner and wondering why business has been so good lately. Gumbo looked out over the marina, where at least a dozen boats were now running their engines, their owners standing nearby with contented expressions and the occasional burst of spontaneous singing. Cedar Key had always been a little weird, but this was a new threshold of absurdity even by Florida standards. Chapter 3. The address Cletus McCready had scribbled on the back of a greasy Napa Auto Parts receipt led Gumbo away from the manicured chaos of the marina and deep into the sweaty armpit of Cedar Key's backwoods. The road, a generous term for what was essentially a suggestion of gravel interrupting a dense thicket of palmettos and slash pines, wound through a landscape that time and the county zoning board had forgotten. Here, rusting Chevy Novas returned to the earth in slow-motion oxidation, vine-choked mailboxes leaned like drunken sentries, and the air hung heavy with the scent of pine needles, brackish mud, and something that smelled suspiciously like burning tires. Gumbo's Jeep bounced over a pothole the size of a jacuzzi, rattling his teeth and dislodging a half-empty bottle of sunscreen from the dashboard. He turned onto a dirt track marked only by a hand-painted sign nailed to a cypress tree. McCready Marine and Small Engine Repair, we fix it or it ain't broke. The workshop emerged from the tree line like a fortress of solitude, built by a hoarder with a master's degree in structural engineering. It was a sprawling, corrugated metal cathedral of commerce, patched together with license plates, plywood, and what looked like the hull of a 1970s pontoon boat welded to the roof for ventilation. Gumbo parked between a mountain of outboard motor skeletons and a stack of crab traps that reached for the heavens like a wire mesh tower of Babel. He stepped out, the humidity immediately wrapping around him like a wet wool blanket. From inside the structure came the rhythmic clank hiss, clank of heavy machinery and the high-pitched whine of a grinder. He navigated a path through the industrial detritus, stepping over a transmission that was serving as a sunning rock for a skittish anole, and pushed open the sliding door. The interior was a cavern of shadows and sparks. Suspended shop lights cast yellow pools on workbenches cluttered with gaskets, pistons, and tools that looked like medieval torture devices. In the center of the chaos stood Cletus McCready, wearing welding goggles and a pair of coveralls that were more oil-stained than fabric. He was attending to a monstrosity of copper tubing, stainless steel vats, and pressure gauges that dominated the rear of the shop. The machine looked like a steam locomotive had mated with a church organ. "Afternoon, Cletus," Gumbo shouted over the din. Cletus jumped, dropping a wrench that clattered against the concrete floor. He flipped up his goggles, revealing raccoon mask circles of pale skin around his eyes. "Gumbo, damn near gave me a heart attack. You can't just sneak up on a man when he's monitoring the thermal exchange ratios." "Door was open," Gumbo said, eyeing the copper contraption. Vapor curled lazily from a vent near the ceiling, filling the shop with that same sweet, high-octane aroma that was currently turning the Cedar Key Marina into a floating karaoke bar. "Is this the magic factory?" Cletus beamed, wiping his hands on a rag that simply redistributed the grease. "She's a beauty, ain't she? Granddaddy's design." He was a pioneer in hydro-organic purification. Gumbo walked a slow circle around the beast. It was a pot still. A massive, industrial-grade, Prohibition-era pot still. But someone, presumably Cletus or his grandfather, had disguised it with an array of scientific-looking dials and labeled various components with masking tape. The condenser coil was labeled particulate filtration unit. The thump keg was marked sediment trap. The collection jar at the end, currently filling with crystal-clear liquid, had a label that read Bio-Solvent output. "Hydro-organic purification," Gumbo repeated. "Is that what we're calling it?" "It's simple science, Gumbo." Cletus tapped a pressure gauge that was redlining. "See, the internal combustion engine is a dirty beast. It gets clogged with carbon varnish, ethanol gunk. You need a solvent that's pure enough to strip the metal clean, but organic enough not to eat the gaskets. Granddaddy spent the 30s and 40s perfecting this system. He called it the Liberator because it liberates the engine from its impurities. I bet it liberates a lot of things, Gumbo muttered. He pointed to a pallet of 50-pound sacks stacked against the wall. That's a lot of corn, Cletus. Cracked corn, Cletus corrected. High starch content. Crucial for the enzymatic breakdown. You soak it, heat it, and the steam carries the cleaning agents up through the coils. The impurities, the mash, Granddaddy called it, stay behind. What comes out is pure distilled cleaning power. Gumbo picked up a hydrometer, floating in a test cylinder near the output spout. He didn't need to be a chemist to read the specific gravity. Cletus, have you ever tasted the cleaner? Cletus looked horrified. Taste it. It's an industrial solvent, Gumbo. You don't go drinking WD-40, do you? Though my Uncle Earl did once on a dare, and he burped squeaks for a week. No, this stuff is strictly for mechanical application. Hazardous material. Hazardous is one word for it. Gumbo dipped a finger into the output stream, shook off the excess and tapped it to his tongue. It was smooth, smoky, and hit his palate with the force of a mule kick. It was, without a doubt, some of the finest corn whiskey ever distilled in the state of Florida. It had notes of vanilla, oak, probably from the aging barrels Cletus likely thought were storage containers, and just a hint of radiator hose. It's 180 proof, Cletus. High volatility, Cletus nodded sagely. That's how it blasts the carbon. Flashpoint is critical. Cletus, look at me. Gumbo waited until the mechanic's earnest, sun-blasted face was focused on him. This isn't engine cleaner. This is moonshine. White lightning. Hooch. You are running a distillery. Cletus stared at him for a long beat, the gears in his head grinding slower than a rusted transmission. Then he let out a sharp, wheezing laugh. Moonshine? You think I'm making liquor? Gumbo, I'm a mechanic, not a bootlegger. Granddaddy was a teetotaler. He hated the drink. Said it made men foolish. That's why he built this water purifier in the woods, to make sure he always had clean water for his radiator repair business. He built a water purifier that runs on corn and produces a flammable liquid that smells like a frat party. The corn acts as a natural filter, like charcoal. Cletus gestured enthusiastically to the copper worm. Look at the schematic. He pulled a yellowed, crumbling blueprint from a workbench drawer. Gumbo leaned in. The blueprint was titled McCready's Potable Aqua and Radiator Flush System. But Gumbo noticed the faint pencil sketches in the margins, drawings of mason jars, dollar signs, and what appeared to be a police car driving off a cliff. Your granddaddy was a genius, Gumbo said, realizing the depth of the deception. The old man hadn't just hidden the still, he'd hidden the idea of the still. He'd framed the entire operation as legitimate mechanical maintenance, likely to fool his wife or the local sheriff. And the lie had worked so well it had fooled his grandson 2 generations later. So you just pour this solvent into the fuel tanks. Fuel additives are a scam, Cletus scoffed. No, I run it straight through the intake. Sometimes I put a little in the gas tank to keep the moisture out. Engines love it. You saw yours. Runs like a dream, right? It runs like it's ready to fight a police boat, Gumbo admitted. But Cletus, the fumes. When you run that through a hot engine, it vaporizes. It goes into the air. Anyone standing on the stern is breathing pure alcohol vapor. Cletus paused, scratching his chin with a caliper. Is that why Mrs. Henderson hugged me yesterday? She never hugs anybody. She usually hits me with her purse if I leave grease on the gunnel. That is exactly why Mrs. Henderson hugged you. She was hammered, Cletus. You're getting the whole marina drunk. Cletus looked at the machine, then at the jug of clear liquid, and finally back at Gumbo. A flicker of concern crossed his face. Is that bad for the gaskets? Forget the gaskets. It's bad for well, actually, nobody seems to mind. Gumbo thought about the harmonizing at the fuel dock. But it's definitely illegal. You can't just manufacture untaxed spirits and pump them into the atmosphere. I ain't manufacturing spirits, Cletus insisted, grabbing a jug and capping it forcefully. I am creating a bio-friendly, corn-based, high-efficiency engine treatment. If folks get a little giddy from the exhaust, that's just a side effect of superior combustion. He looked so defensive, so genuinely committed to his identity as an eco-conscious mechanic, that Gumbo didn't have the heart to arrest him. Not that he had the authority anyway. Plus, Gumbo's own engine had never run smoother. Okay, Gumbo said, holding up his hands. Let's say it is engine cleaner. How much are you making? Production is up, Cletus said, his pride returning. Word of mouth is spreading. I got a backlog of 20 boats waiting for the treatment. I had to fire up the secondary condenser. He pointed to a second, slightly smaller copper contraption in the corner that looked like a tuba strangled by a boa constrictor. And you're sourcing the corn locally? Feed store. They give me a bulk discount. Think I'm raising hogs? Cletus winked. Trade secret. Gumbo rubbed his temples. He had a mechanic who was accidentally the biggest moonshine kingpin on the Gulf Coast, a marina full of intoxicated boaters operating heavy machinery, and a cleaner that was likely flammable enough to launch a space shuttle. Cletus, Gumbo said, grabbing an empty mason jar from the workbench. I need to take a sample. For independent analysis. I want to make sure the viscosity is within maritime safety limits. Smart, Cletus nodded. Safety first. You take what you need. And hey, tell Eddie I'll be down later to service the rental fleet. Those pontoons are looking sluggish. Gumbo filled the jar from the output tap, the liquid swirling mesmerizingly clear. He sealed it tight. Maybe hold off on the rental fleet, Cletus. Let's see how the analysis comes back first. We wouldn't want the tourists getting overcombusted. As Gumbo walked back to his jeep, clutching the jar of engine cleaner, he looked back at the shed. Smoke puffed rhythmically from the chimney, disappearing into the Florida sky. It was a disaster waiting to happen. It was a felony in progress. It was a public safety hazard. He unscrewed the lid and took a tiny sip. It was also, undeniably, the smoothest engine cleaner he had ever tasted. Gumbo climbed into his jeep, the suspension groaning in protest. He had to figure out how to keep Cletus out of federal prison, stop the town from turning into a floating frat house, and maybe, just maybe, secure a few more gallons of this miracle solvent before the ATF shut the whole party down. As he pulled onto the dirt road, a raccoon scurried across his path, grabbed a discarded corncob from the ditch, and seemed to give him a slow, knowing nod. Yeah, I know, Gumbo said to the raccoon. Don't judge me. Chapter 4. Big Eddie Torino sat behind the counter of the Moon Shine Marina bait and tackle shop, staring at the cash register tape like it was a ransom note written in hieroglyphics. Usually, a Tuesday afternoon in Cedar Key involved selling 3 bags of frozen shrimp, a 6-pack of Diet Coke, and maybe a replacement drain plug to a tourist who had forgotten to put the old one back in before launching. It was a slow, rhythmic commerce, punctuated by complaints about the humidity, the red tide, and the federal government's inability to dredge the channel. Today, however, the register tape was longer than a CVS receipt for a single pack of gum. Gumbo, Eddie said into his phone, not taking his eyes off the numbers. Get down here. The economy just collapsed upward. Gumbo arrived 5 minutes later, carrying a half-eaten bag of pork rinds and wearing a shirt that featured hula girls dancing on a volcano. He found Eddie surrounded by empty shelves. The snack aisle, usually a graveyard of dusty potato chips and expiration date-defying Twinkies, had been looted. What's the emergency? Gumbo asked, crunching a rind. Look at this. Eddie slapped the receipt tape. In the last 3 hours, I have sold out of beef jerky. I have sold out of Funyuns. I have sold every single pair of those polarized sunglasses that make you look like a state trooper, the ones that have been sitting in that carousel since 1998. People need eye protection, Eddie. I sold a captain's only hat to old man Miller, Eddie whispered, his voice trembling. Miller hasn't bought anything but 87 octane and dead shiners in 40 years. He calls hats frivolous head decoration. Today, he bought the hat, put it on sideways, and tipped me a 20. Gumbo walked to the window overlooking the docks. The scene outside looked less like a marina and more like a tailgate party for a boat show that had decided to drop acid. The usual Tuesday crowd, a collection of sun-leathered grumps who communicated primarily through grunts and spit, was socializing. Actually, socializing. Near the cleaning tables, 3 men who had been engaged in a decade-long feud over a lobster trap boundary were currently hugging. One of them was weeping openly about the beauty of a pelican sitting on a piling. It's the vibe, Gumbo said, fighting a smile. People are feeling spirited. Spirited. They're manic, Gumbo. Look at slip 14. Gumbo squinted. At slip 14, the Hendersons were hosting what appeared to be an impromptu salon. Mrs. Henderson was reading poetry to a group of fishermen who were listening with rapt, glassy-eyed attention. The exhaust from their boat, which was idling gently at the dock, drifted over the crowd like a holy mist. I think it's the water, Eddie said, pacing behind the counter. The county must have screwed up the treatment plant. Did a pipe burst near a pharmaceutical factory? Is there a leak at a dentist's office pumping nitrous into the aquifer? I don't think it's the water, Eddie. It has to be. Look at the revenue stream. I made more money selling useless nautical knickknacks before lunch than I made in all of last October. A guy just bought that dusty taxidermy pufferfish I keep as a joke. He paid $50 for it. He said he felt a spiritual connection to its spikes. Gumbo watched a man on the fuel dock attempt to high-five a seagull. The man missed, spun in a slow, graceful circle, and sat down hard on a coil of rope, laughing hysterically. It's not the water, Gumbo said softly. It's the air quality. It's very rich today. Eddie stopped pacing. He leaned over the counter, sniffing. The air in the shop was thick with the scent of dead bait and rubber, but underneath it, drifting in from the open door, was that unmistakable sweet corn perfume. It smells like a bakery that exploded inside a distillery, Eddie said. It's Cletus, isn't it? He's been servicing engines all morning. He's very efficient, Gumbo noted. I walked past the service bay earlier. Cletus was singing opera. Opera, Gumbo. The man listens to AM talk radio and static. Today he was belting out La Donna e Mobile while changing a fuel filter. A customer stumbled through the door, the little brass bell jangling violently. It was Mayor Bob Big Fish Johnson, a man whose campaign platform had been, I won't raise taxes because I can't do math. He was wearing a life jacket over a tuxedo t-shirt. Eddie, the mayor boomed, his face flushed a healthy vascular crimson. I need ice. All the ice. And do you have any of those little umbrellas for drinks? The festive kind. We don't sell drink umbrellas, Mr. Mayor, Eddie said. This is a bait shop. A tragedy. The mayor leaned heavily on the counter, swaying like a palm tree in a gale. We should pass an ordinance. Mandatory festive umbrellas. I'll bring it up at the next council meeting. Also, I need to buy a boat anchor. You already have an anchor, Bob. I want a backup. A big one. To hold me down to this beautiful earth. The mayor slapped a wet $100 bill onto the counter. Keep the change. Buy yourself something nice. Like a pony. He grabbed 2 bags of ice and waddled out, humming the theme song to Gilligan's Island. Eddie watched him go, then looked at Gumbo. He tipped me $40 on a $6 purchase. He told me to buy a pony. Economic stimulus, Gumbo shrugged. This isn't stimulus. This is mass hysteria with a cover charge. If this keeps up, I'm going to run out of inventory by Friday. I'll be selling the floor tiles. Eddie grabbed his ledger. I need to order more. Everything. Frozen pizzas. Those Little Debbie cakes. Beef jerky. Chewing gum. Aspirin. Lots of aspirin. Why aspirin? Because, Eddie said, tapping his temple with a pen, whatever goes up must come down. And when this marina crashes, the collective hangover is going to register on the Richter scale. Outside, the sound of a spontaneous barbershop quartet erupted from the end of the pier. They were singing a hauntingly beautiful, slightly slurred rendition of Row, Row, Row Your Boat. They're harmonizing, Eddie whispered, horrified. Fishermen don't harmonize, Gumbo. They grunt and lie about fish size. This is unnatural. It's the Moon Shine Marina now, Eddie, Gumbo said, heading for the door. Might as well enjoy the profit margins while they last. Where are you going? To buy some snacks, Gumbo said, grabbing the last bag of spicy pork rinds from the rack. Before the price goes up. As he stepped out onto the porch, the air hit him, a warm breeze carrying the scent of salt spray, diesel, and high-proof ambition. Down by the boat ramp, a tourist was trying to pay Cletus McCready for an oil change with a hug and a bucket of blue crabs. Cletus, looking like a grease-stained saint, accepted both with a benevolent smile. Gumbo crunched a pork rind. It was going to be a profitable week, provided nobody lit a match. Chapter 5. The black Ford Taurus that rolled into the Moon Shine Marina parking lot stood out like a nun at a wet t-shirt contest. It was aggressively nondescript, clean enough to eat off of, and radiated a palpable aura of federal bureaucracy. The windows were tinted darker than a politician's soul, and the tires were rotated with mathematical precision. Gumbo, currently leaning against a piling and nursing a lukewarm Diet Coke, watched the vehicle prowl past the rows of rusted pickups and salt-caked trailers. He sighed. In Cedar Key, a car like that usually meant one of two things: a lost tourist looking for the Disney exit, or the government looking for someone who didn't want to be found. The driver's door opened, and a woman stepped out. She was dressed in a navy blue pantsuit that defied the laws of thermal dynamics. It was 92 degrees with 90% humidity, weather that usually reduced clothing to damp rags within minutes. Yet she looked as crisp as a freshly minted subpoena. Her hair was pulled back in a bun tight enough to lift her eyebrows, and she wore sunglasses that cost more than Gumbo's first car. She scanned the marina with the predatory efficiency of a raptor searching for a field mouse. "Here we go," Gumbo muttered to a pelican perched on the railing next to him. The pelican burped, a sound that oddly mimicked Gumbo's internal monologue. The woman marched toward the docks, her heels clicking a staccato rhythm on the crushed shell path. She bypassed the bait shop, ignored the live shrimp sign, and zeroed in on Old Man Miller, who was currently lying on the deck of his skiff, staring at the clouds and giggling softly. Gumbo pushed off the piling and intercepted her just as she reached for her badge. "Afternoon," Gumbo said, blocking her path with a smile he hoped looked more friendly local and less accomplice to a felony. "Can I help you find something? Bait? Ice? Directions to civilization?" The woman stopped. She removed her sunglasses, revealing eyes the color of cold steel. "I'm Special Agent Sandra Williams, ATF." She flashed a badge that looked heavy enough to anchor a dinghy. "I'm looking for the proprietor of this facility." "That would be Eddie," Gumbo said. "He's inside, probably hyperventilating over his inventory profit margins." "Is there a problem, Agent Williams?" "We've detected anomalous thermal signatures in this sector," Williams said, her voice devoid of humidity. "And an unusual spike in bulk agricultural purchases. Specifically, cracked corn and yeast. Enough to supply a mid-sized bakery, or... She let the sentence hang there, heavy with implication. Or feed the ducks, Gumbo suggested. We have very hungry ducks here. Voracious. Some of them are the size of Labradors. Williams didn't blink. I'm investigating reports of illicit distillation. Unlicensed production of spirits. Moonshine, Mr. Malone. Gumbo Malone. And moonshine? Here. Gumbo chuckled, a sound that felt brittle in his throat. Agent Williams, look around. Do these look like the kind of industrious, criminal masterminds capable of running a distillation operation? Half these guys can't remember to put the drain plug in before they launch. Williams glanced at Miller, who was now trying to braid a length of fishing line into his beard while humming the national anthem. Behavioral analysis suggests intoxication, Williams noted, pulling a small notebook from her blazer. That's just the fresh air, Gumbo said quickly. High oxygen content today. Very invigorating. Sea breeze. The air smells like a bourbon mash factory, Williams countered, sniffing delicately. It's distinct. Sweet corn. Fermentation. Copper. Ah, that. Gumbo thought fast. That's the algae bloom. Red tide's weird cousin. Gold tide. Smells exactly like Kentucky sour mash. Marine biologists are baffled by it. Williams stared at him. The look suggested she knew he was full of it, but she hadn't yet determined exactly how full of it. I'm going to inspect the premises. Do not interfere, Mr. Malone. She stepped around him and marched toward the service bay, her nose twitching like a bloodhound on a scent trail. Gumbo pulled out his phone and texted Eddie, Fed. Hide the cash. Then he texted Cletus, stop cleaning things. He caught up to Williams, just as she reached Cletus's work area at the far end of the dock. Cletus was bent over the open-engine cowling of a sleek center console, pouring a gallon of clear liquid into the intake manifold. He was singing Amazing Grace at the top of his lungs, replacing every third word with carburetor. Excuse me, Williams barked, her voice cutting through Cletus's aria. Cletus jumped, splashing a liberal amount of 180 proof cleaner onto the hot engine block. A plume of aromatic steam erupted, engulfing the three of them in a cloud that smelled like a frat house floor on a Sunday morning. Whoa there. Cletus wiped his goggles, beaming at the agent. Careful, ma'am. This is a sterile work environment. Can't have contaminants in the intake. Williams waved the vapor away, coughing. I am Agent Williams, Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms and Explosives. What exactly is in that jug? Cletus looked at the jug, then at the agent. His face was a portrait of open-hearted innocence. This is McCready's Bio-Solvent. Top of the line. Eco-friendly. Breaks down carbon deposits faster than a duck on a June bug. Williams snatched the jug from his hand. She unscrewed the cap and took a deep sniff. Her eyes watered. She recoiled, the fumes hitting her with the subtle force of a sledgehammer. This is liquor, she accused, holding the jug away from her body. High-proof corn whiskey. Liquor. Cletus looked offended. Ma'am, that there is an industrial degreaser. You wouldn't want to drink that. It'd strip the enamel right off your teeth. My granddaddy designed it specifically for marine applications. Look at the viscosity. He pointed a greasy finger at the liquid sloshing in the jug. I don't care about the viscosity, Williams snapped. I care about the tax stamp. I care about the federal distillation permit. Where is your production facility? My shop's back in the woods, Cletus said, pointing vaguely north. But if you're looking for permits, I got 'em all. County business license, hazardous waste disposal, fire marshal inspection. Distillation permit, Williams repeated, her patience thinning like ozone. Distillation. Why would I distill engine cleaner? Cletus laughed, looking at Gumbo for support. That's like knitting a tire iron. Don't make no sense. Gumbo stepped in, sensing the agent was about 2 seconds away from slapping cuffs on the mechanic. Agent Williams, Cletus is an artist, a savant of the internal combustion engine. He doesn't produce alcohol for consumption. He produces a fuel additive. If the chemical composition happens to overlap with ethanol, that's just convergent evolution. Williams glared at Gumbo, then looked back at Cletus, who was currently checking the agent's government vehicle with a critical eye. You know, Cletus said, walking around the Taurus, I can hear a little tick in your lifters from here. That government fleet maintenance ain't what it used to be. You let me run a quart of this solvent through your system, she'll purr like a kitten. On the house. Williams blinked. The sheer, unadulterated helpfulness seemed to short-circuit her interrogation protocols. You want to put moonshine in my federal vehicle? Solvent, Cletus corrected gently. And I guarantee you'll see a 20% boost in throttle response. Probably clean out your injectors too. I am seizing this container for laboratory analysis, Williams announced, clutching the jug to her chest. And I will be conducting a thorough audit of your shop in the woods. If I find a still, Mr. McCready, you are looking at 20 years. If you find a still, Cletus said, confused, you let me know. I've been looking for a good way to distill water for my batteries. Granddaddy's purifier is great, but it's awful complicated. Williams stared at him for a long, agonizing silence. She looked at Gumbo, who gave her a thumbs up. She looked at the boat owner nearby, who was currently weeping with joy because his engine sounded so brave. I'll be back, she warned, turning on her heel. She marched back toward her car, the jug of evidence swinging by her side. Wait, Cletus called out. You forgot your receipt for the sample. I need to log that for inventory. Williams didn't stop. She got into the Taurus, slammed the door, and peeled out of the lot, kicking up a cloud of dust that mixed with the sweet boozy haze hanging over the marina. Nice lady, Cletus said, wiping his hands on his coveralls. Intense. Needs to relax. Maybe she should buy a boat. Cletus, Gumbo said, exhaling a breath he felt he'd been holding since Tuesday. We have a problem. That jug. She's going to test it. Let her test it, Cletus shrugged, turning back to the engine. It's the best cleaner on the market. Tests will prove it. Hey, hand me that wrench. I got a backlog of 3 pontoons and a shrimp trawler waiting for the treatment. Gumbo handed him the wrench. He watched Cletus work, marveling at the man's impenetrable armor of ignorance. The feds were coming, the lab coats were coming, and Cedar Key was about to become ground zero for the weirdest legal battle in the history of alcohol enforcement. Cletus, Gumbo said, do you have any more of that cleaner? I have a feeling I'm going to need a drink. I need to clean some parts. Top shelf, behind the spark plugs, Cletus pointed without looking up. Help yourself. Just don't spill it on the paint. Chapter 6. The University of Florida's Coastal Research Station occupied a concrete bunker on the edge of the marsh that looked less like a bastion of higher learning and more like a hurricane shelter that had been colonized by aggressive mildew. It was a place where science was conducted on a shoestring budget, usually involving buckets of mud and graduate students who hadn't seen the sun since the previous semester. Gumbo found Dr. Patricia Vance in Lab 4B, a room that smelled intensely of formaldehyde and despair. Dr. Vance was a forensic chemist who usually spent her days analyzing fish guts for heavy metals, a career path that had left her with a permanent expression of mild nausea and a cynicism that could strip paint. Today, however, Dr. Vance looked different. She was standing in front of a gas chromatograph mass spectrometer, a beige box worth more than Gumbo's entire life earnings, wearing a tie-dye lab coat and tapping her foot to a salsa beat that only she could hear. Gumbo, she shouted, spinning around on her stool with the grace of a ballerina. If ballerinas wore Crocs and safety goggles. You made it. Did you see the pelican outside? I named him Sir Flaps-a-Lot. He has a very noble profile. Gumbo set the mason jar of Cletus's Bio-Solvent on the stainless steel counter. Dr. Vance, are you feeling okay? I am spectacular, she declared, picking up a pipette with a flourish. Science is spectacular. Molecules are just tiny Legos for God. Think about it. I try not to, Gumbo said. Did you run the sample? Run it. I took it for a marathon. I ran it through the GCMS, the HPLC, and I even put a drop under the electron microscope just to see if it waved back. She grabbed a printout that was scrolling onto the floor. This substance, Mr. Malone, is an impossibility. It is a chemical paradox. It is the platypus of liquids. Is it dangerous? Dangerous. Only to boredom and liver function. She slapped the paper onto the counter. I assumed, based on your description, that I'd be looking at some backwoods mixture of kerosene and optimism. But this is art. Gumbo leaned in to look at the jagged peaks on the graph. Translate for the liberal arts major. Okay, look at this spike here. She traced a line that shot off the top of the page. That's ethanol. Ethyl alcohol. Pure, unadulterated, corn-fed joy. We're talking 92% purity. 184 proof. Most commercial distillers can't hit that without specialized reflux columns. Whoever made this understands vapor pressure on an intuitive, almost supernatural level. Cletus McCready, Gumbo said. He thinks he's purifying radiator water. He's a genius, Vance said, her eyes widening behind the goggles. But here's the kicker. See this little blip right here? The anomaly. She pointed to a tiny, insignificant bump in the graph. That, she whispered, is acetone. And right next to it, a trace amount of limonene, citrus oil. Limonene. Does this Cletus fellow eat oranges while he works? He eats everything while he works. I saw him drop a Cheeto into a transmission yesterday. That's it. Dr. Vance clapped her hands. Contamination. He must be cross-contaminating the batch with trace amounts of industrial degreaser, or maybe just eating lunch over the open vat. But here's the magic. The ethanol is so high proof that it acts as a carrier solvent, and that tiny microscopic amount of acetone and citrus oil breaks the surface tension of carbon deposits instantly. It creates a hyper-efficient, volatile cleaning agent. So, it actually works. Works? Gumbo, if you poured this into a Honda Civic, it would probably try to qualify for the Daytona 500. It dissolves varnish, sludge, and regret on contact. It burns clean, it burns hot, and it smells like a bakery on fire. It is the perfect engine cleaner. She paused, a goofy grin spreading across her face. Also, I spilled some on my hand about 20 minutes ago. Gumbo looked at her hand. It was pink and clean. And that's the other thing, she said, leaning in close. Gumbo could smell the faint, sweet aroma of corn mash radiating off her. The solvent properties are so effective that it acts as a transdermal delivery system. It bypasses the stomach, bypasses the blood-brain barrier delay. It soaks right through the skin and into the bloodstream. You don't even have to drink it. You just have to marinate in it. Oh boy, Gumbo sighed. That explains the hugging fisherman. It's wildly efficient intoxication, Vance enthused. No calories. No bloating. Just instant, permeating euphoria. Look at me. I'm usually miserable on Tuesdays. Tuesdays are for mercury poisoning analysis. But today, I feel like I could fight a shark. Or hug a shark. Definitely something involving a shark. She spun on her stool again, giggling. "Patricia," Gumbo said, using her first name to try and ground her. "The ATF agent, Williams. She took a gallon of this." "Ooh," Vance winced, though she was still smiling. "She's not going to be happy." "Well, she might be happy if she spills it, but legally, she's going to be very upset." "Is it toxic? I mean, besides the alcohol poisoning?" "Technically, no. It's safer than half the stuff under your kitchen sink. No methanol, no fusel oils. It's remarkably clean. If Cletus bottled this as artisanal hand sanitizer for the soul, he'd be a billionaire. But as an engine cleaner? It's a felony with a garnish." The lab door swung open, and a grad student named Kyle walked in carrying a bucket of oysters. He stopped, staring at his supervisor, who was currently using a Bunsen burner to heat up a Pop-Tart. "Dr. Vance?" Kyle asked. "Are we doing the heavy metal toxicity screen?" "Kyle," Vance shouted, waving the Pop-Tart. "Change of plans. We are studying the effects of ethanol-based solvents on morale. Put down the oysters and come smell this jar." Gumbo grabbed the mason jar before Kyle could become the next subject in this unauthorized clinical trial. "Dr. Vance, I need you to write up a report," Gumbo said. "But not the it gets you drunk part. Focus on the cleaning agents. The acetone. The limonene. Can you draft a chemical analysis that emphasizes its validity as an industrial solvent?" "I can do anything," Vance declared. "I can see sound. The refrigerator hum is an F-sharp. Did you know that?" "The report, Patricia." "Right. Report. Analysis of high-efficiency bio-solvent with trace catalysts. I'll use lots of big words. Hydrophobic interaction. Surfactant efficacy. I'll make it boring. I'm great at boring." She grabbed a notepad and started writing furiously, her pen tearing through the paper. "But Gumbo," she said, not looking up, "you realize this doesn't change the fact that your mechanic is running a still that produces 180 proof hooch, right? The government doesn't care if it cleans carburetors. They care about the tax revenue." "I know," Gumbo said, watching her work. "I'm working on a loophole. Or a distraction. Or maybe a very fast boat." "Well," Vance tore off the sheet of paper and handed it to him. It was covered in complex chemical formulas and a small drawing of a pelican wearing a top hat. "This proves it's a cleaner. Technically. It just happens to be a cleaner that gets you hammered if you forget to wear gloves." "Thanks, Doc." "No problem." She turned back to her Pop-Tart. "Now, if you'll excuse me, I need to go recalibrate the centrifuge. I think if I spin it fast enough, it might open a portal to a dimension where grant money grows on trees." Gumbo left the lab, clutching the scientific proof that Cletus McCready was an accidental genius. The corridor outside was quiet, save for the hum of the air conditioning and the distant sound of Dr. Vance singing La Bamba to a beaker of algae. He stepped out into the blinding Florida sun. His phone buzzed. It was a text from Eddie. "Williams is back." She brought gloves. Gumbo looked at the report, then at the jar of clear liquid. "Science," he muttered. "It's all about how you spin the data." He climbed into his Jeep. He had the science. Now, he just needed a lawyer who could argue that getting wasted was a necessary component of marine maintenance. In Florida, that was practically a constitutional right. Chapter 7. Snake Davidson did not have customers. He had victims. His shop, Davidson's Discount Marine and Bait, was located 3 miles down the coast in a sinkhole-prone stretch of marsh that even the mosquitoes found depressing. It consisted of a leaning cinder-block garage, a vending machine that dispensed warm Mountain Dew, and a sign that promised cheapest labor in Tri-County area. Snake himself was a man who looked like he had been cured in a smokehouse. He was wiry, twitchy, and wore a mesh tank top that offered an unobstructed view of a tattoo on his shoulder that was supposed to be a panther but looked more like a melted gummy bear. Currently, Snake was watching the marina through a pair of binoculars that were missing one eye cup. "Look at him," he spat, addressing a three-legged dog named Tripod who was chewing on a spark plug. "Lined up like cattle. Throwing money at that old fool." Through the lens, Snake watched the procession at Cletus McCready's slip. A line of boats bobbed in the water, their owners practically skipping down the dock to hand Cletus wads of cash. He saw Mrs. Henderson hug Cletus. He saw the mayor drop off a basket of muffins. He saw a pelican land on Cletus's shoulder and not try to bite his ear off. "He's putting something in the gas," Snake muttered, scratching a patch of oily skin on his neck. "Magic additives. Voodoo juice." Snake dropped the binoculars and marched into his garage. If Cletus McCready could brew up a miracle cure, then Snake Davidson could brew up something cheaper. He swept a pile of unpaid invoices off his workbench, revealing a chemistry set he'd bought at a garage sale in 1998. It was missing the instructions and most of the safety warnings, but Snake didn't believe in safety warnings. He believed in volume. "Corn?" he said, recalling the rumors swirling around the bait shops. "They say it smells like corn. And cleaner." He grabbed a can of industrial-strength paint stripper. That smelled like cleaner. "And it makes the engine run hot," he reasoned. He added a quart of kerosene. "And people get happy." He poured in a bottle of rubbing alcohol he found under the sink. It was green, wintergreen scented. Close enough. "And the secret ingredient," Snake whispered, his eyes gleaming with the manic inspiration of the truly incompetent. He grabbed a jug of gator repellent he'd been trying to invent last summer, which was mostly cayenne pepper and turpentine. He dumped it all into a 5-gallon Home Depot bucket and stirred it with a broken oar. The mixture turned a violent, bruised purple. It hissed. A small bubble rose to the surface and popped, releasing a vapor that caused a spider on the ceiling to drop dead instantly. "Perfect," Snake grinned, revealing teeth that had long ago declared war on dental hygiene. "Davidson's super juice. Now, I just need a guinea pig." An hour later, Arthur P. O'Malley arrived at Snake's dock. Arthur was a snowbird from New Jersey who drove a Cadillac Escalade and owned a boat he didn't understand. He was Snake's favorite kind of customer, rich, impatient, and mechanically illiterate. "Engine sluggish," Arthur complained, wiping sweat from his forehead with a monogrammed handkerchief. "Stalls at idle. And don't try to upsell me, Davidson. I know your tricks." "No tricks today, Mr. O'Malley," Snake said, hoisting the orange bucket. "Just science. I got a new formula. Cleans the valves. Lubricates the pistons. It's the same stuff McCready is using, only I cut out the middleman." "McCready?" Arthur's ears perked up. "I heard about him. People say his stuff works miracles. You have the recipe?" "Me and Cletus go way back," Snake lied, pouring the purple sludge into a funnel. "Shared trade secrets. Only I added a little extra kick. For performance." He glugged the mixture into Arthur's fuel tank. The liquid hit the gasoline and seemed to growl. "Smells strong," Arthur noted, wrinkling his nose. "Like a pine tree dipped in acid." "That's the power," Snake assured him. "Fire her up." Arthur turned the key. The engine cranked. It wheezed. Then, with a sound like a shotgun blast inside a metal trash can, it roared to life. "See." Snake yelled over the noise, which was significantly louder and more metallic than before. "It's vibrating," Arthur shouted, gripping the console as his boat began to shake violently against the dock bumpers. "That's the carbon breaking loose. Go on, take her for a spin." Arthur cast off. He pushed the throttle forward. The boat leapt away from the dock, leaving a wake of purple smoke that hung in the air like a toxic bruise. Snake watched him go, wiping his hands on his pants. "Tripod," he said to the dog. Daddy's gonna be rich. Gumbo was sitting on his aft deck, reviewing Dr. Vance's chemical report and trying to decide if trace citrus oils was a valid legal defense for bootlegging when the smell hit him. It wasn't the pleasant, warm bakery scent of Cletus's solvent. This was sharp, acrid, and aggressive. It smelled like burning hair and cheap gin. What in the hell? Gumbo stood up, looking out across the water. A boat was careening toward the marina entrance. It was Arthur O'Malley's center console, the Jersey Devil. It was moving in a series of erratic jerks, spewing thick violet smoke that clung to the water's surface. As the boat got closer, Gumbo could hear the engine. It wasn't purring. It was screaming. It sounded like a bag of hammers in a blender. "Look out!" someone yelled from the fuel dock. O'Malley's boat slammed into a channel marker, bounced off, and drifted sideways toward the pier. The engine coughed once, expelled a final, masterful cloud of black soot, and died. Gumbo ran down the dock, joined by Eddie and a few curious onlookers. Arthur O'Malley was slumped over the wheel. He wasn't dead, but he looked like he wished he was. His face was a bright, angry crimson, and he was scratching his arms furiously. "Help!" Arthur croaked. "My skin. It's on fire." Gumbo jumped aboard. "Mr. O'Malley. What happened?" "Snake," Arthur gasped, clawing at his neck. "He put the juice in." "Super juice." "Said it was. McCready's formula." "Snake Davidson?" Eddie asked, looking at the purple residue leaking from the engine cowling. "He put this in your tank." "Said it would lubricate," Arthur wheezed. He held up his arm. It was covered in angry red welts that seemed to be pulsing in time with the distant throb of a headache Gumbo was starting to develop just from the fumes. "Get him off the boat," Gumbo ordered. "And get a hose. We need to rinse him down." As they helped the groaning snowbird onto the dock, Gumbo looked into the bilge. The fuel lines were sweating. The rubber hoses looked like they were melting. The super juice was literally eating the boat from the inside out. "Turpentine," Gumbo sniffed, covering his nose with his shirt. "And is that wintergreen?" Snake tried to copy Cletus, Eddie realized, staring at the smoking engine. "But he used poison." "He didn't use poison," Gumbo corrected, looking at the hives blossoming on O'Malley's neck. "He used whatever was under his sink. This isn't moonshine, Eddie. This is chemical warfare." Arthur O'Malley sat up, shivering under the spray of a dock hose. "I'm suing," he sputtered. "I'm suing everyone. I'm suing the ocean." "Don't worry, Arthur," Gumbo said, patting the man's wet shoulder, carefully avoiding the rashes. "I think Snake Davidson just put himself out of business." Across the bay, a faint explosion echoed from the direction of the swamp. A plume of black smoke rose above the tree line. "Or," Gumbo added, watching the smoke rise, "he just blew himself up." "Tripod better be okay," Eddie muttered. "Knowing that dog," Gumbo said, "he probably started the fire." Gumbo looked back at O'Malley's boat, which was now making a sizzling sound as the remaining fuel dissolved the fiberglass tank. "Eddie," Gumbo said, "we need to make sure nobody else goes to Snake's. Cletus might be making moonshine, but at least his product doesn't dissolve the customer." "Quality control," Eddie nodded. "It's important." "I'm going to pay Snake a visit," Gumbo said, heading for his jeep. "If he's not currently on fire, I have some questions about his R&D department." "Take a gas mask," Eddie advised. "I'm taking a fire extinguisher," Gumbo replied. "And maybe some calamine lotion, just in case." Chapter 8. The Liar's Bench, at the end of Dock C, was usually a place where the truth went to die of heatstroke. For years, it had been occupied by a rotating squad of retirees whose primary contributions to society involved complaining about the humidity, fabricating the size of snook they almost caught, and debating whether the government was controlling the weather with satellites or just aggressive incompetence. Today, however, The bench had been transformed. Gumbo approached cautiously. The usual scatter of empty Diet Coke cans and sunflower seed shells was gone. In its place stood a folding card table, covered in a checkered tablecloth. On top of the table sat a row of mason jars, labeled with blue painter's tape, and a collection of pristine, unsoiled engine parts, mostly carburetors and fuel injectors, arranged like religious artifacts. Surrounding the table were 5 men, Gumbo recognized as the marina's old guard. Leading them was Professor Thaddeus Wilkins, a retired high school chemistry teacher who wore a fishing vest with 42 pockets and safety goggles over his bifocals. He held a clipboard with the gravity of a nuclear inspector. Viscosity check on batch 4 alpha, Wilkins barked. Captain Jack, an octogenarian who looked like a sun-dried tomato in a bucket hat, picked up a jar. He held it to the light, swirled it gently, and then poured a precise 2 ounces into a red Solo cup that had been marked with scientific gradations in Sharpie. "Clarity is high," Jack announced, his voice raspy. "0 particulate matter. Aroma is robust." "Proceed with organoleptic analysis," Wilkins commanded, scribbling furiously on his clipboard. Jack lifted the cup. He didn't toss it back like a shot. He sipped it with the delicate consideration of a sommelier tasting a rare Bordeaux. He swished. He frowned thoughtfully. He swallowed. A shudder worked its way down his spine, followed immediately by a smile that looked like it might unhinge his jaw. "Smooth," Jack wheezed, wiping a tear from his eye. "Notes of toasted corn. Slight finish of, is that rubber gasket?" "Polymer interaction," Wilkins noted. "Excellent. It means the solvent is aggressive against sealants. Write that down, Earl." Earl, who was currently asleep upright, snorted awake and made a random mark in a notebook. Gumbo stepped onto the dock boards, the wood groaning under his sandals. "Afternoon, gentlemen. What's the science project?" The reaction was immediate. 5 pairs of eyes snapped toward him. Wilkins adjusted his goggles. Jack hid the red cup behind a carburetor. "Mr. Malone," Wilkins said, his tone clipped and official. "We are conducting critical safety assessments. The Marine Mechanics Safety and Oversight Committee. Very boring stuff. Lots of paperwork. You wouldn't be interested." "I didn't know we had a Safety and Oversight Committee," Gumbo said, eyeing the row of jars. "Formed it this morning," Wilkins said, "in light of the recent innovations in engine maintenance. We felt it was our civic duty to ensure quality control. Can't have unregulated solvents circulating in the fleet. It's a matter of public health." "So you're drinking the engine cleaner," Gumbo said. "We are testing the bioavailability of the ethanol substrate," Wilkins corrected, offended. "It is a rigorous process. We test for pH balance, specific gravity, and palatability. If it burns the tongue, it might burn the fuel lines. It's basic metallurgy." "Professor," Gumbo said, picking up a jar labeled Batch 7 High Octane. "You taught chemistry for 30 years. You know exactly what this is." Wilkins looked left, then right. He leaned over the table, lowering his voice to a conspiratorial whisper. "It's the best damn shine I've tasted since 1974, Gumbo. Cletus isn't just cleaning engines, he's bottling sunshine. But if we don't regulate it, that idiot Snake Davidson is going to poison the whole town with his turpentine soup. We are the first line of defense. You're the tasting committee." "Quality assurance," Jack corrected, retrieving his cup. "And let me tell you, Batch 4 is ready for mass distribution. My arthritis is gone. I can feel my toes for the first time in a decade. I think I might go water skiing." "Please don't go water skiing, Jack," Gumbo said. "We have strict protocols," Wilkins insisted, tapping his clipboard. "No operating heavy machinery until 30 minutes after the test phase. We are responsible scientists. Look, we even have a control group." He pointed to Earl, who was now snoring softly, a half-empty jar of store-bought fuel stabilizer sitting untouched in front of him. Earl is the control. He's on the placebo, Wilkins explained. He's drinking water. He thinks he's hammered. It's fascinating, psychological data. Gumbo looked at the jars. There were at least 3 gallons of Cletus's Bio-Solvent on the table. Where did you get this supply? Donations, Wilkins said vaguely. From concerned citizens who wanted their engines checked. We siphoned it out for analysis. Cletus doesn't even know. He thinks there's a leak in the storage tanks. We told him it was evaporation. The angels share, Gumbo nodded. Exactly. Wilkins beamed. You know your distillation terminology. Care to join the committee? We have an opening for a junior analyst. The benefits are excellent. He pushed a clean solo cup toward Gumbo. I'm on duty, Gumbo said, pushing it back. Investigating the Snake Davidson incident. Speaking of which, have you tested any of his stuff? Wilkins scoffed. We ran a spectrum analysis on Snake's goop, using a litmus strip and a dead cricket. The cricket exploded. We deemed it unfit for marine or human consumption. We issued a verbal warning to the seagulls to stay away from his dock. Doing the Lord's work, Gumbo said. Someone has to. Wilkins checked his watch, a diving watch that looked capable of surviving a nuclear winter. Gentlemen, the sun has passed the yardarm. Commencing Phase 2, endurance testing. What's Phase 2? Gumbo asked. We see how the solvent interacts with cured meats, Jack said, pulling a massive summer sausage out of his tackle box. For science. Gumbo watched as the elderly men, energized by high-proof corn liquor and a renewed sense of purpose, began slicing sausage and pouring fresh rounds of solvent. They weren't just getting drunk, they were reclaiming their agency. They were rebels in orthotic shoes, fighting the tyranny of boredom with chemistry and camaraderie. Professor, Gumbo said before turning to leave. Just pace yourselves. We don't need anyone falling off the dock. The paperwork is a nightmare. Mr. Malone, Wilkins said, raising his cup. In the pursuit of science, risks must be taken. Also, this stuff makes my cataracts clear up. I can see a heron from a mile away. As Gumbo walked back down the pier, he heard the clink of plastic cups and a spirited debate break out over whether the cleaner paired better with sharp cheddar or pepperjack. He took out his phone and texted Eddie. The committee is secure and heavily sedated. Snake's market share is 0. Eddie replied instantly, good. Because Mrs. Gable just tried to buy a kayak. She's 94. She says the engine fumes told her she was a mermaid. Gumbo put the phone away. The marina wasn't just surviving the moonshine crisis, it was thriving on it. It was a perfectly balanced ecosystem of accidental bootlegging and geriatric joy. And as long as nobody lit a match near Dock C, everything was going to be just fine. Chapter 9. Captain Mateo Rodriguez stood on the bridge of the USCG cutter Manatee, a 45-foot vessel designed for high-speed interdiction and search and rescue operations. Currently, however, it was being used to herd cats. Sir, Petty Officer Jenkins said, his face pressed against the radar scope. Target Alpha is doing it again. Define it, Rodriguez sighed, adjusting a cap that was starched stiff enough to slice cheese. He's writing his name in the ocean, sir. Using the wake. I believe he's currently crossing the T in Steve. Rodriguez grabbed his binoculars. 300 yards off the starboard bow, a 20-foot Grady White was executing a series of sloppy, joyous loops. The boat listed heavily to port, not because of mechanical failure, but because the operator, a shirtless man wearing a sombrero and a diving mask, was leaning over the gunwale, attempting to high-five a buoy. That's the third one this hour, Rodriguez muttered. Hail him. Jenkins keyed the mic. Vessel C, Senor. This is the United States Coast Guard. Please throttle down and prepare for inspection. The radio crackled. Coast Guard. Hey. You guys look great. Is that a new paint job? It really pops against the azure majesty of the horizon. Throttle down, si senor. Throttling. I am throttling with extreme prejudice. Hey, do you guys want some deviled eggs? My wife made 40 dozen. Rodriguez rubbed his temples. For the past week, the waters around Cedar Key had turned into the Bermuda Triangle of competence. Experienced captains were running aground on sandbars that had been on the charts since the Spanish Inquisition. Shrimp boats were docking at restaurants instead of processing plants. And everyone, literally everyone, was aggressively, relentlessly cheerful about their navigational incompetence. Bring us alongside, Rodriguez ordered. And tell the boarding team to wear hazmat suits. Or at least nose plugs. The Manatee pulled up next to the sea, senor. The Grady White's engine was idling with a smooth, hypnotic hum that seemed to vibrate in Rodriguez's molars. A plume of exhaust drifted across the gap, carrying the scent of warm cornbread and bad decisions. Rodriguez stepped onto the civilian boat, his boots hitting the fiberglass with a thud of authority. The captain, whose name was indeed Steve, beamed at him. License and registration, Rodriguez barked. Absolutely. Steve rummaged through a glove box overflowing with gummy worms. He produced a Blockbuster video card and a coupon for a free car wash. Wait, that's not it. It's here somewhere. Maybe the Snook took it. The Snook have been very aggressive with their bureaucracy lately. Rodriguez leaned in. The smell, coming from the idling mercury outboard, was intoxicating. Literally. He felt his shoulders drop an inch. The knot of tension that lived permanently at the base of his neck began to loosen. Sir, Rodriguez said, his voice losing its razor edge. Do you know where you are? Earth. Steve guessed. Specifically, the wet part. You are 2 miles inside a protected manatee zone, doing donuts. I wasn't doing donuts, Steve corrected gently. I was spiraling. It's a metaphor for life. Outward, ever outward until you find the center. Rodriguez stared at him. He took a deep breath. The exhaust fumes whirled around them. It really was a lovely day. The water was sparkling like diamonds. Why was he so angry all the time? The ocean was big enough for everyone. Sir, Rodriguez said, fighting the urge to sit down and discuss philosophy. I suspect you have contaminated fuel. Oh, the fuel is fantastic, Steve chirped. Cletus put the special sauce in. Listen to her purr. Cletus? Rodriguez blinked, shaking his head to clear the sudden fog of benevolence. McCready. The mechanic? The wizard, Steve whispered reverently. Rodriguez stepped back onto his cutter, nearly tripping over his own sudden sense of well-being. Jenkins, he said, forcing his voice back into command mode. Note the coordinates. And get Gumbo Malone on the secure line. Or just call his cell. He's probably involved in this nonsense. Gumbo was currently on the roof of his houseboat, trying to convince a seagull not to eat a tube of epoxy when his phone rang. Malone Investigations, he answered. We solve crimes, find pets, and occasionally perform amateur pest control. Malone, Rodriguez's voice crackled, sounding like it was being filtered through a thick layer of confusion. This is Captain Rodriguez. I have a situation. Is it an invasion? Pirates. Did Florida finally secede? It's the fleet, Malone. They're happy. Too happy. I just pulled over a commercial crabber who tried to tip me with a live blue crab. He put it in my pocket. Generous, Gumbo noted. I have 6 vessels currently grounded on Atsina Odi Key, Rodriguez continued. They aren't calling for help. They're having a picnic. They lashed the boats together, and they're singing Jimmy Buffett songs. But the deep cuts, Malone. The B-sides. Sounds like a morale boost. It sounds like a mass neurological event. Rodriguez snapped, though he quickly added, or just a really nice Tuesday. Listen, every single one of them mentioned Cletus McCready. They said he fixed their engines. Gumbo looked toward the marina. A thin haze of blue smoke hung over the water, smelling of sweet mash and efficiency. Captain, Gumbo said carefully, you know how ethanol blends can be tricky in marine environments. Phase separation. Water absorption. This isn't phase separation, Rodriguez argued. This is something else. I boarded a vessel 5 minutes ago. I breathed the exhaust for 30 seconds. Now I have an overwhelming urge to buy a ukulele. What is happening, Malone? I think you might be experiencing oxygen euphorias. Gumbo improvised. Barometric pressure changes. Don't give me that, Rodriguez said. I'm coming to the marina. I'm bringing the manatee. And I'm bringing a fuel testing kit. If McCready is putting nitrous oxide in these tanks, I'm arresting him. If he's putting hallucinogenic mushrooms in the oil filters, I'm arresting him twice. Captain, before you do that, Gumbo said, watching Cletus happily pouring cleaner into a police boat at the fuel dock. Maybe consider the paperwork. Do you really want to fill out incident reports for 50 people whose only crime is excessive smiling? There was a long silence on the line. Gumbo could hear the wind whipping past the Coast Guard microphone. They were harmonizing, Malone, Rodriguez whispered, sounding haunted. The picnic group. They were harmonizing to Cheeseburger in Paradise. Perfectly. I'll meet you at the dock, Gumbo said. By the time the manatee pulled into the marina, Gumbo had intercepted Cletus. Hide the jug, Gumbo hissed. Which one? Cletus asked, looking around a workshop that contained approximately 40 jugs. The one you're holding. Rodriguez thinks you're poisoning the fleet. Poisoning? Cletus looked hurt. I'm optimizing. Steve's compression ratios are up 10%. Steve is writing his name in the ocean with his wake, Cletus. Rodriguez marched down the dock, followed by Jenkins, who was carrying a chemical test kit that looked like a tackle box designed by NASA. The captain looked stern, but his eyes were slightly glazed, and he was walking with a loose-limbed rhythm that suggested he was hearing a steel drum band in his head. McCready, Rodriguez said, stopping in front of the mechanic. I am commandeering a fuel sample. Help yourself, Captain, Cletus said, gesturing to a pontoon boat he had just finished servicing. Tank's full. She's ready to rip. Rodriguez gestured to Jenkins. The petty officer stuck a siphon tube into the pontoon's tank. He pumped the bulb. Clear, golden liquid flowed into a test vial. Smell that, Rodriguez commanded. Jenkins sniffed. Smells like Grandma's cough medicine, sir. The good stuff. From the secret cabinet. Exactly, Rodriguez said. He held the vial up to the sun. It's clear. Too clear. Where's the blue tint? Where's the red dye for off-road use? I use organic additives, Cletus interjected. Filters out the color. 4. Aerodynamics. Rodriguez dipped a test strip into the fuel. He waited. The strip didn't turn the color for gasoline. It didn't turn the color for diesel. It turned a bright, festive pink. What does pink mean? Gumbo asked, looking over Jenkins' shoulder. It means inconclusive, hazardous party time, Jenkins read from the chart. Sir, the chemical composition is off the charts. It's registering as 90% ethanol, 5% corn oil, and 5% love. Love is not an element, Jenkins. The machine says unknown organic compound, happiness, Jenkins shrugged. It's a very advanced machine, sir. Rodriguez looked at Cletus. He looked at the vial. He looked at the marina, where a group of fishermen were currently helping a tourist parallel park his yacht by cheering him on with synchronized clapping. If I report this, Rodriguez said slowly, I have to quarantine the harbor. I have to impound 40 boats. I have to fill out Form CG 4099, mass intoxication via mechanical means. Is that a real form? Gumbo asked. In Florida? Probably, Rodriguez sighed. He swirled the vial. The fumes drifted up, hitting him in the face. He closed his eyes. Damn, that smells good. Like a barbecue at a distillery. Captain, Gumbo said, lowering his voice. If you quarantine the harbor, the local economy collapses. The bait shop closes. The deviled egg surplus goes to waste. Maybe it's just a bad batch of gas from the mainland. A temporary anomaly. Rodriguez took another deep breath of the fumes. His strict adherence to the Uniform Code of Military Justice was currently wrestling with a potent dose of 180 proof vaporized corn. A bad batch, Rodriguez repeated, his words slurring slightly. Contaminated at the refinery. Plausible deniability. Exactly, Gumbo said. I'll make sure Cletus here adjusts the mixture. Dilute the efficacy. For safety. You do that, Rodriguez said. He handed the vial back to Jenkins. Pour this back in the tank, Jenkins. We don't want to create hazardous waste. Aye, sir. Rodriguez turned to Cletus. Mr. McCready. My starboard engine has been knocking. Just a little tick. At idle. Cletus grinned. I got just the thing, Cap. A little preventative maintenance. Clears the carbon right out. Strictly maintenance, Rodriguez emphasized, loosening his tie. I'll bring her by tomorrow. For an inspection. I'll put you on the schedule, Cletus promised. As the Coast Guard team walked back to their cutter, Gumbo watched Rodriguez stop to pet a stray cat. The captain picked it up, looked it in the eyes, and appeared to be asking it for navigation advice. We dodged a bullet, Gumbo said, wiping sweat from his forehead. Dodged. Cletus snorted. We just gained a government contract. I'm gonna need more corn. Just don't make the cutter run too good, Gumbo warned. If they start doing donuts, people are going to ask questions. I'll give 'em the mild blend, Cletus winked. Just enough to make the patrolling interesting. Gumbo watched the manatee pull away from the dock. It didn't speed off on a mission of urgency. Instead, it drifted lazily into the channel, the crew visible on the deck apparently debating the merits of cloud shapes. Navigation errors, Gumbo muttered. Right. Chapter 10. The vehicle that rattled into the Moon Shine Marina parking lot wasn't so much a truck as it was a geological event on wheels. It was a 1976 Ford F-250, rusted to the color of a bruised peach, with a suspension lift that required a stepladder for entry, and Tennessee plates that were held on by baling wire and hope. Gumbo was sitting on the cooler in front of the bait shop, watching a tourist try to feed a hot dog to a manatee, when the truck's engine died with a sound like a shotgun blast into a bucket of silverware. The driver's door groaned open. A boot the size of a cinder block hit the gravel. Out stepped a man who was clearly cut from the same genetic cloth as Cletus McCready, but where Cletus was coastal weathered and vague, this man was mountain hardened and sharp. He wore denim overalls over a shirt that had once been plaid, and his beard was thick enough to hide a small family of badgers. He adjusted a trucker hat that read Volunteer State Possum Wrangling Finalist 1988. He stood there for a moment, head tilted back, sniffing the air. He didn't sniff like a dog. He sniffed like a sommelier analyzing a cork. He flared his nostrils. He tasted the breeze. Then a slow, terrifying grin split his beard. Well, butter my butt and call me a biscuit, the man bellowed, his voice echoing off the aluminum siding of the boat storage barn. If that ain't Granddaddy Silas's wake-up juice floating on the wind. Gumbo stood up. Can I help you? The giant turned. You can help me find Cletus. I'm his cousin, Beauregard. I drove 12 hours because Cletus posted a picture on the Facebook of a carburetor that looked suspiciously like a thump keg. He's in the shop, Gumbo said, pointing toward the corrugated metal fortress in the woods. But be warned, he's in a sensitive mood. The Coast Guard just complimented his fuel mixture. Beauregard didn't wait. He marched toward the shop with the stride of a man coming to collect a debt. Gumbo followed, sensing that the fragile ecosystem of accidental felonies was about to be disrupted by an expert. Inside the shop, Cletus was humming a tune that sounded vaguely like Rocky Top while polishing the copper coils of his purifier with a diaper. Cletus! Beauregard roared from the doorway. Cletus jumped, banging his head on a hanging transmission. Beau! Cousin! I didn't know you were coming. I would have put the good tires on the guest recliner. Beauregard ignored the pleasantries. He walked straight to the massive still, his eyes scanning the gauges, the condenser worm, and the collection jar filled with crystal-clear liquid. He ran a hand along the copper tubing with the reverence of a priest touching a holy relic. You idiot, Beauregard said softly, affectionately. You absolute corn-fed turnip. Now hold on, Cletus protested, rubbing his head. This here is a precision instrument. Granddaddy's legacy. The McCready potable aqua system. Potable aqua. Beauregard laughed, a sound like boulders grinding together. Is that what he told you? Cletus, look at the solder joints. Look at the slope of the line arm. That ain't designed for water. Water don't need a reflux ratio of 3:1. Beauregard grabbed a mason jar from the workbench. He unscrewed the lid, took a swig that would have killed a lesser mammal, and swished it around his mouth. Notes of hickory, Beauregard announced. High starch finish. And, is that a hint of WD-40? That's the lubricant for the pump seals, Cletus explained nervously. It adds body, Beauregard nodded. Cletus, this is the 33 recipe. This is the exact mash Bill Granddaddy used to run down to Atlanta during the Great Depression. He wasn't fixing radiators, son. He was fixing the economy. Cletus looked at the machine. He looked at the jar. He looked at Gumbo, who was leaning against the doorframe eating a bag of peanuts. But the diagrams, Cletus stammered. He labeled them. Sediment trap. Particulate filter. Code, Beauregard said. Granddaddy was paranoid. He thought the revenue men were hiding in his soup. Sediment trap is the thump keg. Particulate filter is the condenser. And radiator flush. Beauregard slapped his knee. That was his code for the high-proof stuff he sold to the judges to keep him blind. Cletus sank onto a stool, looking like his entire worldview had just been deflated. You mean I'm a bootlegger? A criminal? You're an artisan, Beauregard corrected. And judging by the smell of this marina, a successful one. Granddaddy would be proud. He always said you had the touch, even if you were dumb enough to try and milk a bull that one time. It was dark, Cletus muttered. And the bull was calm. The point is, Beauregard continued, you've got the system dialed in perfectly. I've been trying to replicate this flavor in Tennessee for 20 years, but I never could get the heat right. What's your heat source? Cletus pointed to a burner assembly underneath the main pot. I modified a propane injection system from an old crematorium furnace I bought at an auction. Beauregard stared at him. Gumbo stopped chewing a peanut. A crematorium furnace? Gumbo asked. It gets up to temp real fast, Cletus defended. Very consistent BTUs. Well, Beauregard said, shaking his head in admiration. That explains the smoky aftertaste. It's distinct. Morbid but distinct. Beauregard walked over to the stack of grain sacks. He plunged his hand into the cracked corn. And you're using feed corn? Yellow dent number 2? The ducks love it, Cletus said weakly. Of course they do. It's full of sugar. Beauregard turned to Gumbo. You see what we have here? This man has accidentally stumbled into a multi-million-dollar operation using junk parts and ignorance. It's the American dream. It's a federal indictment waiting to happen, Gumbo reminded them. Agent Williams took a sample. If she traces this back to a Prohibition-era recipe, Cletus isn't just looking at finds. He's looking at history books. Beauregard scratched his beard. The sound was like sandpaper on wood. Williams? Sandra Williams? Short hair, looks like she irons her socks. That's her. I know her, Beauregard said. She raided my cousin Earl's operation in '09. Tough lady. But she has a weakness. What? Cletus asked, hopeful. She loves a good narrative, Beauregard said. And she loves mechanical ingenuity. Earl got off with a warning, because he built his still out of a repurposed church organ. She appreciated the craftsmanship. This is built out of a pontoon boat and a crematorium burner, Gumbo pointed out. Exactly. It's folk art. Beauregard clapped a massive hand on Cletus's shoulder. Listen to me, Cletus. You stop calling it engine cleaner. That's fraud. You start calling it historic biofuel additive. You lean into the heritage. You tell them you are preserving a lost Appalachian technology. I thought we were from Florida, Cletus said. We are now, Beauregard said. We're Swampalachian. It's a demographic. Look, I'll help you dial in the mash. We can cut the acetone smell by adjusting the foresight cut. Make it smoother. If we're going to poison the engines, let's at least give them a top-shelf buzz. Cletus looked at his cousin, then at his machine. The confusion in his eyes was slowly being replaced by a flicker of pride. Swampalachian, Cletus tested the word. I like it. Sounds legitimate. It sounds like a marketing campaign, Gumbo said. Which is exactly what we need before the lab results come back. Just then, a loud bang echoed from the marina, followed by the sound of cheering. What was that? Beauregard asked, reaching for a wrench as a weapon. That, Gumbo said, checking his watch, is the 4 o'clock pontoon parade. They backfire in unison to signal the start of happy hour. Beauregard walked to the door and looked out at the line of boats, all spewing the sweet, intoxicating exhaust of the McCready family legacy. It's beautiful, Beauregard whispered, wiping a tear from his cheek. Granddaddy always said he wanted to bring joy to the masses. He just didn't know the delivery system would be an Evinrude outboard. He turned back to Cletus. Fire up the crematorium burner, cuz. We got work to do. If we're gonna go down, we're gonna go down 190 proof. Cletus grabbed his goggles. Yes, sir. Biofuel production initiating. Gumbo stepped out of the way as the two McCready men, united by blood and questionable chemistry, began to fine-tune the most efficient accidental distillery on the Gulf Coast. He grabbed another handful of peanuts. This was going to be a long night, and he had a feeling he was going to need a cleaner sample of his own before it was over. Chapter 11. The fluorescent lights of the workshop hummed in D minor, a mournful accompaniment to the existential meltdown currently taking place on a grease-stained stool. Cletus McCready sat with his head in his hands, staring at his boots like they were foreign objects that had betrayed him. Around him, the tools of his trade, torque wrenches, compression gauges, a calendar from 1998 featuring the women of hydraulic repair, seemed to mock his newfound reality. I'm a felon, Cletus whispered into his palms. I ain't a mechanic. I'm a gangster. I'm Al Capone in coveralls. Beauregard McCready leaned against the copper beast, chewing on a stalk of lemongrass he'd found growing near the septic tank. You ain't Capone, Cletus. Capone had syphilis and a better accountant. You're just a man with a gift. A gift for crime. Cletus wailed. He gestured wildly at the wall of certifications framed in cheap plastic. Look at that. Certified Mercury Outboard Technician, Level 4. That means something, Bo. It means I know the firing order of a V6 by heart. It means I respect the sanctity of the intake manifold. And you still do, Beauregard said soothingly. You just realized that the intake manifold likes a stiff drink now and then. Gumbo watched the therapy session from his perch on a stack of radial tires. He was eating a pickled egg he'd bought from the bait shop, a risky decision that was already paying dividends in regret. Cletus, Gumbo interjected. You didn't know. Mens rea. Guilty mind. You didn't have it. In the eyes of the law, you were just aggressively incompetent at chemistry. Ignorance of the law ain't no excuse, Cletus recited, sounding like a man who watched too many episodes of Judge Judy. I've been pumping Schedule 1 narcotics into the local fishing fleet. Alcohol isn't a narcotic, Gumbo corrected. It's a depressant. Or a stimulant, depending on who you ask at the tiki bar. It's illegal. Cletus stood up, pacing a tight circle around a dismantled transmission. I have customers, Gumbo. Good people. Mrs. Gable. The mayor. Father O'Shea. I put 3 gallons of cleaner in the church rectory's generator last week. The Sunday sermon was about the Holy Spirit moving through the ventilation system. I drugged a priest. Beauregard chuckled. Bet the collection plate was heavy that day. This isn't funny. Cletus kicked a socket wrench, which skittered across the floor and vanished under a workbench. I have a reputation. Honest Cletus. Reliable Cletus. Now I'm bootlegger Cletus. Pusher Cletus. What happens when the engines stop running? What happens when I have to tell them the special cleaner is just corn juice? He stopped, looking at the still with genuine betrayal. I thought I was saving the planet, he whispered. Biofuel. Green energy. I was gonna buy a canvas tote bag. Beauregard pushed off the copper tank and walked over to his cousin. He placed a hand, the size of a catcher's mitt, on Cletus's shoulder. Listen to me, Beauregard said, his voice dropping to a gravelly register that commanded attention. You think Granddaddy Silas built this rig because he wanted to get folks drunk? No. He built it because the world is a hard, grinding place. It wears down your gears. It gums up your pistons. Sometimes a machine, whether it's made of iron or meat, needs a little help to run smooth. But it's liquor, Cletus argued weakly. It's lubricant, Beauregard insisted. Social lubricant. Emotional lubricant. Mechanical lubricant. You think those fishermen are happy because their spark plugs are clean. They're happy because for 20 minutes on the water, the world stops grinding. You ain't selling booze, Cletus. You're selling smooth operation. Cletus blinked. He looked at the still. He looked at the jar of clear liquid sitting on the bench. Smooth operation, Cletus repeated. Damn straight, Beauregard said. Now come here. I want to show you the difference between the heads and the hearts. You've been pouring the premium cuts into the gas tanks and saving the tails for the parts washer. It's a waste of craftsmanship. Beauregard led Cletus back to the collection jar. He dipped a finger in, tasted it, and nodded. See? That bite right at the front. That's the acetone. That's your cleaner. But underneath? That sweetness? That's the corn singing. You gotta learn to separate the song from the scream. Cletus leaned in, his mechanic's curiosity overriding his moral panic. So, if I adjust the reflux temperature, you can strip the methanol out earlier, Beauregard finished. Make it cleaner for the engines and the customers. Safer. Better performance. Less chance of Agent Williams arresting us for poisoning federal property. Gumbo finished his pickled egg and wiped his hands on his shorts. The crisis seemed to be passing, replaced by the comforting allure of technical specifications. Then came the knocking. It wasn't a polite tap. It was a frantic, rhythmic pounding on the metal bay door, accompanied by muffled shouting. "Cletus, open up. It's an emergency." Cletus froze. "That's Mrs. Gable." "The 94-year-old?" Gumbo asked. "She drives a 20-foot Boston Whaler with a 200-horsepower Mercury," Cletus whispered. "She says she likes to feel the wind in her dentures." He walked to the door and slid it open a crack. Mrs. Gable stood there, clutching a wicker purse and looking like she was vibrating. Behind her, a line of 3 other customers held empty gas cans and hopeful expressions. "Cletus, thank heavens," Mrs. Gable gasped, pushing a strand of blue hair from her face. "My boat is sluggish. It feels depressed. It's making a sound like thump 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 instead of purr purr purr." "Probably just a fouled plug, Mrs. Gable," Cletus said, blocking the view of the still with his body. "It needs the treatment," she insisted, trying to peer around him. "The special cleaner. The Bio-Solvent. I have bridge club on the water in an hour, and the ladies are expecting a smooth ride." Behind her, Mr. Henderson waved a wad of cash. "I got a hesitation at wide-open throttle, Cletus. I need the juice. I'll pay double." Cletus looked back at Beauregard. He looked at Gumbo. He looked at the eager, desperate faces of his neighbors. They didn't look like junkies. They looked like people who had finally found a mechanic who could fix the unfixable, the crushing weight of reality. Cletus took a deep breath. He squared his shoulders. He wiped his hands on his coveralls, leaving a fresh streak of grease over his heart. "All right," Cletus announced, stepping back to allow them entry. "Bring 'em around back. But there's been a formulation update. We're moving to version 2.0. Higher purity. Better emission standards." "Does it still smell like happy bread?" Mrs. Gable asked, suspicious. "Yes, ma'am," Cletus smiled, a genuine crooked grin. "It smells exactly like happy bread." As the customers rushed in, clamoring for their fix, Beauregard gave Gumbo a wink and turned a valve on the copper beast. Steam hissed. The smell of corn and victory filled the air. "He'll be fine," Beauregard grunted. "Once he realizes he can charge a hazardous materials disposal fee for the good stuff." Gumbo walked out into the humid evening air. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of bruised purple and orange. A heron took flight from the marsh, its silhouette stark against the horizon. The town of Cedar Key was running on 180-proof optimism, and for now, the engine was holding together. But Gumbo knew engines. Eventually, something always blew a gasket. He checked his phone. No missed calls from the ATF. Yet. "Smooth operation," Gumbo muttered to himself, climbing into his Jeep. "Until the wheels fall off." Chapter 12. The morning sun rose over Cedar Key with the brutal enthusiasm of a spotlight hitting an interrogation chair. Gumbo sat on the flybridge of his boat, the second wind, sipping coffee that tasted like battery acid, and watching the invasion force assemble in the parking lot. It wasn't a military invasion. It was worse. It was a bureaucratic pincer movement. The black Ford Taurus of the ATF had returned, but it had brought friends. Flanking it was a lime green Prius with Environmental Protection Agency stenciled on the door in recycled font, a white van marked Florida Department of Health that looked like it transported organ transplants, and a Coast Guard SUV that was parked diagonally across 3 handicapped spots. "It looks like a convention for people who hate fun," Eddie Torino said, climbing up the ladder to join Gumbo. He looked pale. "I counted 6 clipboards, Gumbo." 6. That's a level of paperwork usually reserved for nuclear accidents. "Who's the guy in the hazmat suit?" Gumbo asked, pointing to a figure near the Prius who was currently scanning a patch of crabgrass with a Geiger counter. "That's the EPA guy." He asked me if the marina had a runoff mitigation strategy. I told him we usually just kick the raccoons into the marsh. And he wrote something in a red notebook. I think I'm already fined. Gumbo finished his coffee. Well, we can't let Cletus face this alone. Beauregard is probably trying to convince them the still is a historical monument. They climbed down and headed toward the shop. The air, usually thick with the scent of salt and Cletus's sweet corn-based cleaner, was now heavy with the ozone smell of federal authority. When they arrived at McCready Marine, the standoff was already in progress. Cletus stood in the doorway of his corrugated fortress, wearing his best church coveralls, the ones with only 3 oil stains. Beauregard stood behind him, looking like a bear that had been taught to fold its arms menacingly. Facing them was a firing squad of acronyms. Agent Williams was tapping her foot, her patience clearly having evaporated somewhere on Highway 24. Next to her stood Agent Skinner, a man so thin he looked like he could hide behind a sapling, holding a glass vial of marsh water accusingly. On the other flank was Inspector Clades from the Health Department, who was wearing latex gloves and a look of profound disgust. "Mr. McCready," Williams began, her voice cutting through the humidity. "We are not here to discuss Bio-Solvent. We are here to discuss the 500 gallons of untaxed distilled spirits you are currently manufacturing next to a wetland." "It ain't spirits," Cletus protested, sticking to the script Beauregard had drilled into him. "It is a heritage-based, high-efficiency combustion modifier. It's swamp Alatchin technology." "It's 190 proof," Williams snapped. "I ran the sample. It's stronger than hospital disinfectant. You could run a rocket on this." "You could," Cletus agreed, beaming. "Mrs. Gable's whaler certainly feels like a rocket. She got it up on plane in 3 seconds flat." "That is exactly the problem," interrupted Agent Skinner from the EPA. He waved his vial. "We have detected anomalous readings in the local wildlife. The fiddler crabs are moving 20% faster than the regional average. The pelicans are exhibiting unusually bold social behaviors. We suspect ethanol runoff is entering the food chain." "The crabs are happy," Beauregard rumbled from the shadows. "Leave them alone." "Happy is not a quantifiable metric," Skinner squeaked. "We are dealing with a potential ecological disaster. If the manatees start exhibiting impaired motor skills, we are talking about a Class 1 federal incident." "Excuse me," Inspector Clades cut in, snapping a latex glove. "I am more concerned with the distribution method. I have reports that this solvent is being stored in unsterilized milk jugs, Tupperware containers, and in one instance, a hollowed-out coconut. This is a vector for botulism, salmonella, and whatever lives in a coconut." "That coconut was a souvenir," Cletus defended. "And I boiled it first." Gumbo stepped into the circle of doom. "Ladies, gentlemen, agents, before we start arresting the local wildlife for public intoxication, can we look at the bigger picture?" 4 heads snapped toward him. Agent Williams narrowed her eyes. "Mr. Malone, I assume you are here as legal counsel." "I'm here as a translator," Gumbo said. "You see, what we have here is a classic case of interagency confusion." "There is no confusion," Williams said. "He is running a still." "He is running a refinery," Gumbo corrected. He turned to the EPA agent. "Agent Skinner, have you tested the emissions of the boats using Cletus's fuel?" Skinner blinked. Well, no. I was focused on the crab velocity." "You should check it," Gumbo urged. "I bet you'll find that Cletus's blend burns cleaner than standard marine gasoline. 0 carbon monoxide. 0 sulfur. Just pure clean water vapor and the scent of fresh biscuits." Skinner paused. He looked at his Geiger counter. "Cleaner than gasoline?" "Much cleaner," Gumbo lied effortlessly. "It's basically a carbon-neutral miracle. If you shut him down, you're forcing the fleet back onto dirty fossil fuels. You'd be personally responsible for destroying the ozone layer over Cedar Key. Skinner looked horrified. He looked at Williams. Is this true? Is the moonshine carbon neutral? I don't care if it cures the common cold, Williams yelled. It's untaxed alcohol. The Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms, and Explosives does not give awards for green energy. But the EPA does, Skinner murmured, intrigued. We have a grant program for biofuel innovation. He is not getting a grant, Williams shouted. He is getting handcuffs. Just then, a golf cart careened around the corner of the shop. It was driven by Captain Rodriguez of the Coast Guard, who looked like he hadn't slept in 3 days. He slammed on the brakes, skidding to a halt inches from Agent Williams's shins. Hold your fire, Rodriguez bellowed, jumping out. He was holding a stack of papers, thick enough to choke a horse. Captain Rodriguez? Williams asked. Are you here to assist in the arrest? I am here to file a jurisdictional dispute, Rodriguez announced, slamming the papers onto the hood of the EPA Prius. The United States Coast Guard claims primary authority over this investigation. On what grounds? Williams demanded. On the grounds of national security, Rodriguez said, keeping a straight face that deserved an Academy Award. We have determined that the substance in question has potential military applications. We are classifying it as a strategic naval asset. It's moonshine, Williams screamed, losing her composure entirely. It's corn whiskey made in a crematorium furnace. It is a high-performance thermal compound, Rodriguez corrected, winking at Gumbo. And until my engineers finish their evaluation, nobody touches the supply. That tank is now property of the U.S. government. Wait, Inspector Clade said. If it's government property, does it meet OSHA standards for chemical storage? I see rust on that tank. I see duct tape. That is structural tape, Cletus interjected helpfully. The 4 agents turned on each other. Williams started citing tax codes. Skinner started arguing about emissions testing protocols. Rodriguez started reading maritime law statutes at Volume 10. Inspector Clades just started spraying everything with disinfectant, including Agent Williams's shoes. Gumbo leaned over to Beauregard. How much cleaner is left in the tank? About 50 gallons, Beauregard whispered. And another 20 in the aging barrels out back. Load the barrels into my truck, Gumbo whispered back. While they're arguing over who gets to write the ticket. As the argument escalated into a shouting match about whether a thump keg constituted a pressure vessel under EPA Regulation 402, Gumbo watched Cletus and Beauregard quietly roll 2 oak barrels out the back door. You can't arrest him. Skinner was yelling at Williams. He's an environmental pioneer. I need to measure his carbon footprint. I'm going to measure his prison cell, Williams retorted. I need to measure the bacteria count on his overalls. Clade shrieked. Gumbo stepped back, fading into the background. The regulatory nightmare had arrived, but for the moment it was paralyzed by its own complexity. It was a beautiful, chaotic stalemate. Hey, Gumbo, Eddie whispered, appearing at his elbow. Mrs. Henderson is on the phone. She wants to know if the federal people are going to delay the 2 p.m. fuel delivery. She says her bridge club gets cranky without the vapors. Tell her to sit tight, Gumbo said, watching the feds scream at each other. We're currently in negotiations. A seagull landed on the roof of the ATF car and relieved itself on the siren. It was the most sensible thing that had happened all morning. Gumbo checked his watch. If they could keep this up for another hour, they might just be able to hide the evidence before the subpoena arrived. Or at least drink it. Chapter 13. The standoff at McCready Marine had entered its 45th minute, a duration usually reserved for hostage negotiations or waiting for a table at a brunch spot that serves bottomless mimosas. Agent Williams was vibrating with the specific frequency of a bureaucrat who has been denied a signature. Agent Skinner was trying to measure the particulate matter of a horsefly that had landed on his nose. Inspector Clade's health department was sanitizing his own sanitizer bottle. "This is obstruction of justice," Williams hissed, wiping sweat from her upper lip. "I am calling for backup. I am calling the SWAT team." "For a mechanic?" Gumbo asked, leaning against a rusted engine block. "You're going to raid a shed with flashbangs because a man used too much corn in his radiator fluid." "It is a distillery," Williams screamed, pointing at the copper beast visible through the open door. "It is a monument," Cletus corrected, standing in front of his creation with his arms crossed over his grease-stained chest. "To American ingenuity." "It's a fire hazard," Clade shouted. Before Williams could dial the tactical response team, a low rumble began to vibrate through the soles of Gumbo's sandals. It wasn't the sound of thunder, or an explosion, or even a very large truck. It was the sound of 52 electric golf carts, 3 mobility scooters, and a vintage Schwinn bicycle approaching at maximum velocity. "What is that?" Skinner looked up from his Geiger counter. "That," Gumbo said, recognizing the lead vehicle, "is the cavalry. And they look thirsty." The procession rounded the corner of the gravel lot, like a slow-motion panzer division piloted by the AARP. Leading the charge was Mayor Bob Big Fish Johnson, driving a golf cart customized to look like a Humvee painted in Jimmy Buffett camouflage. Riding shotgun was Mrs. Delilah Henderson, holding a megaphone in one hand and a Tupperware container of ambrosia salad in the other. Behind them stretched a sea of pastel polo shirts, floppy hats, and determination. "Circle the wagons," the mayor bellowed into a walkie-talkie that wasn't connected to anything. The golf carts swarmed. They flanked the government vehicles. They blocked the exit. They parked inches from Agent Williams's shins. Within seconds, the federal agents were surrounded by a wall of retirees, boat captains, and local eccentrics. Mrs. Henderson stood up in the moving cart, her knees popping audibly. She raised the megaphone. "Step away from the mechanic," her amplified voice squawked, frightening a heron in the nearby marsh. "We are armed with casserole, and we vote." Agent Williams put her hand on her holster. "Ma'am, this is a federal crime scene. Disperse immediately." "Disperse?" Mrs. Henderson scoffed. "Young lady, I have lived in Cedar Key since before you were a glint in the IRS's eye. We do not disperse. We congregate. Aggressively." Mayor Johnson stepped out of his cart. He was wearing his sash of office, which was actually a Miss Crustacean Fest 1999 sash turned inside out. He adjusted his sunglasses and waddled toward the agents with the confidence of a man whose approval rating was tied directly to the price of happy hour drinks. "Agents," the mayor boomed. "I am Mayor Bob Johnson. And you are harassing a vital municipal resource." "We are investigating a felony," Williams retorted. "You are investigating a miracle worker," shouted a man from the back row. It was Old Man Miller, wearing the captain's only hat sideways. "Cletus fixed my Johnson. My outboard. Runs like a scalded cat." "He saved my marriage," yelled a woman holding a poodle dyed pink. "The engine vibrations brought us closer together." "He cured my gout," screamed a man who was clearly confused about how engines worked. Gumbo watched the mob mentality shift. This wasn't a protest. It was a revival meeting. The fumes from the past week had created a bond stronger than steel, a community united by the shared hallucination that their boats loved them. "This is insane," Inspector Clades muttered, backing away from a woman trying to offer him a deviled egg that had been sitting in the sun. "These people are compromised." "We are not compromised," the mayor declared. "We are organized. As of 10 minutes ago, under the power vested in me by the bylaws of the City Council, specifically Section 4, Paragraph B, regarding emergency party planning, I hereby declare this group the Cedar Key Marine Mechanics Appreciation Society." A cheer went up from the crowd. Horns honked. The pink poodle barked. "The what?" Williams blinked. "The CKMMAS," Gumbo supplied helpfully. "Rolls right off the tongue." "And as a registered civil society," the mayor continued, poking Agent Williams in the chest with a finger that smelled of shrimp bait, "we are filing a formal injunction against this harassment. Mr. McCready is our designated chief technical officer. His shop is a protected cultural heritage site." "You can't just declare a bootlegger a heritage site," Williams argued. "Watch me," the mayor said. He pulled a piece of paper from his pocket. It was a napkin from a Waffle House, but it had a gold seal sticker on it. Executive Order 867-5309. McCready Marine is now a sanctuary for experimental biofuel research. Agent Skinner's ears perked up. "Research? Is there data?" "I need the data." "Tons of data," Cletus piped up from the doorway. "I got a notebook full of it. Mostly grease stains, but some numbers too." "We will fund the grant ourselves," Mrs. Henderson announced. She slammed a jar onto the hood of the ATF Taurus. "This is the Legal Defense and Party Fund. Who's in?" The response was immediate. The crowd surged forward. $20 bills rained down. So did 50s. Someone threw a gold watch. "This is bribery," Williams yelled, retreating toward her car as the cash piled up on her windshield. "It's lobbying," Gumbo corrected. "Totally legal. Ask any congressman." The mob pressed closer. They weren't violent, but they were overwhelmingly helpful. They started cleaning the government cars with spit-shined rags. They offered directions to the highway. They insisted the agents try the ambrosia salad. "Eat the salad," Mrs. Henderson commanded, thrusting a spoon at Agent Williams. "It has marshmallows. It calms the nerves." Williams looked at the spoon. She looked at the mayor, who was currently trying to pin a junior deputy badge on Agent Skinner. She looked at Cletus, who was signing autographs on gas cans. "Retreat," Williams ordered. Her voice was tight. "Tactical retreat. We cannot secure the perimeter against aggressive hospitality." "But the biofuel grant," Skinner whined as he was shoved into the Prius by a helpful grandmother. "Get in the car, Skinner." The agents scrambled into their vehicles. The engines roared to life, sounding significantly rougher and less happy than the boats in the marina. "We will be back," Williams shouted through the glass as Mrs. Henderson tried to put AI less than 3. Cedar Key bumper sticker on her trunk with a warrant. "And the National Guard." "Bring 'em," Old Man Miller yelled. "We got enough potato salad for the whole army." The government convoy peeled out of the lot, scattering gravel and escaping the terrifying love of the CKMMAS. As the dust settled, the crowd erupted into cheers. The mayor high-fived Cletus. Mrs. Henderson hugged Gumbo, smelling of expensive perfume and righteousness. "We did it," Cletus beamed, looking out at his adoring fans. "They really love my engine work." "They love what's in the engine, Cletus," Gumbo reminded him gently. "Same difference," the mayor said, clapping Gumbo on the back. "Now, Mr. Secretary of the Appreciation Society, I believe the first order of business is a toast." "I'm the secretary?" Gumbo asked. "You're the only one who can write legibly," the mayor shrugged. "Motion to adjourn to the Tiki Bar for a systems check." "Seconded," yelled the entire crowd. As the golf carts began to file out, heading toward the promise of sunset drinks, Gumbo looked at the pile of lobbying cash still sitting on the hood of Cletus's truck. "We just unionized a felony," Gumbo muttered. "Only in Florida." He picked up a $20 bill that had blown onto his shoe. Meeting adjourned, Gumbo said, and followed the parade. Chapter 14. Melinda Kowalski's law office was located in the back of the Krabby Barrister, a seafood shack that smelled predominantly of hush puppies and litigation. The sign out front read, "Fresh mullet and living wills, walk-ins welcome." Gumbo sat at a booth upholstered in sticky red vinyl, watching Cletus McCready try to explain the concept of a reflux condenser to a woman who looked like she could cross-examine a great white shark and win. Melinda Kowalski was 30-something, sharp-featured, and wearing a suit jacket over a Save the Manatees t-shirt. She was currently dissecting a plate of fried gator tail with a plastic fork while reading Dr. Vance's chemical analysis report. "So," Melinda said, not looking up, "let me get this straight. You aren't distilling spirits. You are refining a biological solvent that just happens to be 90 proof corn whiskey." 180 proof, Cletus corrected proudly. 90% purity. It's very efficient. And you aren't selling it in bottles. You're pouring it directly into combustion engines. Intake manifolds, Cletus nodded. Though sometimes I put a little in the gas tank for moisture control. It's a full-service treatment. Melinda wiped grease from her lip and looked at Gumbo. And the ATF is parked outside his shop like they're waiting for El Chapo to show up. Agent Williams is currently measuring the volume of the aging barrels with a laser tape measure, Gumbo said. She's very thorough. She called Cletus a kingpin. A kingpin of cleanliness, Cletus added. Melinda tapped the report with a fingernail painted electric blue. She stared at the ceiling fan, which was wobbling in a rhythmic, hypnotic circle. A slow smile spread across her face, terrifying in its intensity. "Hand me the receipt book," she ordered Cletus. Cletus fumbled in his coveralls and produced a grease-stained spiral notebook. "I keep good records. Date, boat name, engine type." Melinda flipped through the pages. "See here. Service call, $75. Carburetor flush, $50. System optimization, $100. Cletus, show me where you charge for the liquid." "I don't charge for the cleaner," Cletus said, offended. "The cleaner is part of the service. It's overhead. Like rags or WD-40. I charge for my time and expertise." Melinda slammed the notebook shut. "Bingo." "Bingo?" Gumbo asked. "The Federal Alcohol Administration Act," Melinda recited, her eyes gleaming, "specifically prohibits the sale, distribution, or bartering of untaxed spirits. But Cletus isn't selling spirits. He isn't distributing spirits. He is performing a mechanical service. But the service involves getting the customer hammered on exhaust fumes," Gumbo pointed out. "Incidental environmental exposure," Melinda waved a hand dismissively. "That's an OSHA problem, not an ATF problem. And since the product is consumed entirely during the combustion process, or at least vaporized, there is no beverage being sold. You can't tax a vapor, Gumbo. Not yet, anyway." "So, he's legal?" Cletus asked, hope rising in his chest like yeast. "You aren't just legal, Cletus," Melinda grinned. "You are a regulatory ghost. You don't exist. You are a hole in the ozone of federal law." She grabbed her briefcase, which was sitting in a puddle of tartar sauce. "Finish your gator, boys. We have a meeting with the government." Agent Williams was in the middle of sticking an evidence do not touch sticker on Cletus's coffee pot when the black Jeep pulled up. Melinda Kowalski exited the vehicle before it had fully stopped, marching toward the agent with the kinetic energy of a Category 4 hurricane. "Agent Williams," Melinda shouted. "Step away from the coffee pot. That is a crucial component of a small business infrastructure." Williams straightened up, hand drifting to her belt. "Who are you?" "Melinda Kowalski, attorney at law. I represent Mr. McCready and McCready Marine Services." She shoved a business card into Williams's pocket. "And you are currently conducting an illegal search of a service facility." "This is a distillery," Williams said, tired. "We have the still. We have the mash. We have the barrels. You have a water purification system and some corn," Melinda corrected. "Possession of corn is not a crime, agent. Unless you're in Nebraska, maybe. But here, it's agriculture." "He is selling moonshine," Williams pointed a shaking finger at Cletus. "He is selling it to the entire town." "False," Melinda declared. "Show me the receipt." Williams blinked. "Excuse me?" "Show me one receipt where Cletus McCready sold a bottle, jar, or jug of alcohol to a consumer. Show me a transaction for White Lightning. Show me a price tag for hooch." Williams looked at the pile of confiscated ledgers on the hood of her car. She grabbed one. She flipped pages. "He charges for engine therapy," Williams read. "Service," Melinda said. "He charges for internal combustion healing." "Service." "He charges for the good stuff." "Marketing term for a proprietary cleaning process," Melinda countered. "Is the good stuff itemized by volume? Is it sold by the liter? The gallon?" Williams stared at the page. "It says, flat rate $60. Flat rate service fee," Melinda nodded. "The solvent used is incidental. It is a tool of the trade. Like a wrench. You don't tax a plumber for the water he uses to flush a pipe, do you?" "He is pouring whiskey into engines," Williams screamed. "High-grade whiskey." "He is pouring a bio-solvent," Melinda corrected. "We have the lab report from Dr. Vance at the university. It classifies the substance as an industrial degreaser with high ethanol content. It is not a beverage. It is a chemical tool." Agent Skinner from the EPA, who had been hiding in his Prius eating a granola bar, poked his head out. "Did she say bio-solvent?" "Yes," Melinda pivoted to him. "And as an industrial solvent, used in a closed-loop mechanical system, it is exempt from excise taxes under Title 27, Section 19. Unless, of course, the EPA wants to claim jurisdiction over engine cleaning fluids." Skinner looked at Williams. "She's right, Sandra. If it's not a beverage, it's not your jurisdiction. It's hazardous waste management." "It is not waste," Cletus yelled. "It is liquid gold." "Shush," Gumbo hissed, kicking Cletus in the shin. "It is a consumable," Melinda emphasized. "It is destroyed in the act of usage. There is no product left to tax. The alcohol is burned. Poof. Gone." "But the fumes," Williams argued, desperate. "The people are breathing it. They are getting intoxicated." "Secondary inhalation," Melinda shrugged. "Do you arrest a painter because the fumes make him dizzy? Do you arrest a baker because the yeast smells good? No. You regulate ventilation. Maybe Cletus needs a bigger fan. We can discuss that with the code enforcement officer." Williams looked at the still. She looked at the ledgers. She looked at Melinda, who was smiling with the predatory confidence of a lawyer who knew she had found the one loose thread in the sweater of federal bureaucracy. "This is a loophole," Williams said, her voice hollow. "A loophole the size of a tanker truck." "It's the law, Agent," Melinda said sweetly. "And until Congress passes the McCready Act, specifically prohibiting the use of corn-based solvents in marine engines, my client is free to clean whatever he wants." Williams slumped against her Taurus. She looked defeated. She looked like a woman who needed a drink, but couldn't have one because all the alcohol in town was currently being used to tune up shrimp boats. "I need to call Washington," Williams muttered. "I need to explain to the director that we can't arrest the bootlegger because he's a janitor." "A marine sanitation engineer," Cletus corrected, standing tall. "Whatever," Williams waved a hand. "Just don't sell it in bottles." If I see one bottle, McCready, I'm coming back with a tank. Strictly internal application, Melinda promised. From the jug to the lug. As the agents retreated to their cars to make angry phone calls, Gumbo watched Melinda pack up her briefcase. "You are terrifying," Gumbo told her. "I know," Melinda smiled, checking her watch. "Now, who owes me legal fees? I accept cash, check, or fresh stone crab claws." "I can pay you in engine cleaner," Cletus offered. "Only if you pour it into my Volvo," Melinda said. "She's been idling rough lately." Gumbo watched the sunset paint the sky over the marsh. The feds were stalled. The booze was flowing, technically as a cleaning agent. And Cletus McCready was, for the moment, the most legally compliant bootlegger in American history. "God bless America," Gumbo whispered. "And the fine print." Chapter 15. The conference table was a Coleman cooler topped with a piece of plywood that had been scavenged from a hurricane 3 seasons ago. It sat in the neutral zone of the gravel parking lot, precisely equidistant between the government blockade and the fortress of McCready Marine. On one side sat Agent Williams, Agent Skinner, and Inspector Clade's Health Department, looking like a tribunal of heat-exhausted buzzards. On the other side sat Melinda Kowalski, Cletus McCready, and Gumbo Malone. The humidity was so thick, you could have served it on a plate with a spoon. "This is the situation," Agent Williams began, peeling a wet page off her clipboard. She looked less like a federal hammer now, and more like a woman who just wanted to go home and sit in front of an air conditioner until her core temperature dropped below nuclear meltdown. "We have reviewed the legal statutes. We have reviewed Ms. Kowalski's arguments regarding the definition of industrial solvent. We have also reviewed the mayor's declaration of this shed as a cultural heritage site." She paused, glaring at a seagull that was currently trying to steal the pen from her pocket. "While we maintain that Mr. McCready is operating a distillation plant that violates the spirit of the law," Williams continued, "we are forced to admit that the letter of the law is currently ambiguous regarding the combustion of corn-based fluids in outboard motors." "Ambiguous," Cletus whispered to Gumbo. "That means I'm winning, right?" "It means they can't figure out how to arrest you without being sued by the Sierra Club," Gumbo whispered back. "However," Williams raised her voice, cutting off Cletus's victory grin, "the United States government does not tolerate ambiguity. We tolerate revenue and regulation." She slid a document across the plywood. It was thick, terrifying, and printed on paper that smelled like bureaucracy. "This is a TTB Form 5110.41, Williams announced. "Application for registration of a distilled spirits plant. Industrial, non-beverage classification." "I ain't signing a confession." Cletus balked, recoiling as if the paper were radioactive. "It's not a confession, Cletus," Melinda said, scanning the document with eyes that missed nothing. "It's a permit. They want to license you." "We are prepared to offer a deferred prosecution agreement," Williams said, looking like the words tasted like spoiled milk. "Mr. McCready will apply for a DSP permit. He will register his still, the Heritage Water Purifier, as a production facility. He will pay the federal excise tax of $13.50 per proof gallon." $13.50. Cletus shouted, standing up and knocking the cooler table askew. "That's robbery. That's un-American. My corn costs me $4 a sack." "Sit down, Cletus," Melinda ordered. She turned to Williams. $13.50 is the beverage rate. If this is an industrial solvent, as established by the EPA's interest in its eco-friendly properties, the rate should be 0 under the completely denatured alcohol statutes." "It isn't denatured," Williams snapped. "To be denatured, he has to add poison, methanol, kerosene. He refuses to add anything but love and good vibes. And citrus oil," Agent Skinner piped up from the end of the cooler. Don't forget the limonene. It's a natural degreaser. The point is, Williams gritted out, it is potable. Highly potable. I watched a man drink a cup of it earlier, and then recite the Gettysburg Address backward. Therefore, it is taxed as a spirit. But we will allow him to sell it as engine treatment, provided he adheres to strict labeling requirements. Labeling? Cletus asked, suspicious. Warning labels, Inspector Clades interjected, producing a roll of stickers that featured a skull and crossbones so graphic it looked like a heavy metal album cover. Not for human consumption. May cause blindness, death, or the urge to fight a police horse. Flammable. Do not drink. Cletus looked at the stickers. He looked at his beautiful, crystal-clear jars of Bio-Solvent. I ain't putting a skull on my jar, Cletus stated flatly. It sends the wrong message. It says death. My product is about life. And throttle response. It's a non-negotiable safety standard. Clade shrieked. What if we compromise on the graphic? Gumbo suggested, stepping into the breach before Clades could try to disinfect Cletus's face. No skull. How about a silhouette of a person clearly not having a good time? A frowning face. A vomiting face, Clades countered. A nauseous face, Gumbo negotiated. And we add the text, product is extremely potent. Consumption may void warranty of your liver. Intended for mercury outboards only. Williams rubbed her temples. Fine. A warning label. Text must be 12-point font bold. And he pays the tax. Up front. Monthly. And the EPA. Melinda turned to Skinner. We want data, Skinner said, eyes wide. We want him to log every gallon. If he can prove a reduction in hydrocarbon emissions across the fleet, we might be able to classify the tax payments as carbon offset credits in the next fiscal year. So, the government pays him back the tax money to save the planet, Gumbo asked. Theoretically, Skinner nodded. It's a circular economy. Gumbo looked at the sky. A circular economy where a mechanic made moonshine, paid the ATF to make it legal, and then got the money back from the EPA because it saved the dolphins. It was the most Florida solution imaginable. What about the health department? Melinda asked Clades. He needs a sink, Clades said firmly. A dedicated, hand-washing sink. Not a hose. Not a bucket. A sink. With soap. I can do a sink, Cletus grumbled. I got an old porcelain one out back I was going to use for a planter. And no more selling it in milk jugs, Clades added. Glass containers. Sealed. Sterilized. Mason jars are traditional, Beauregard rumbled from behind Cletus. We got crates of 'em. Mason jars are acceptable, Williams conceded, checking her watch. So, do we have a deal? Mr. McCready becomes a licensed, taxed, regulated manufacturer of spirits-based engine cleaner. Cletus looked at the permit. He looked at the tax rate. He looked at Melinda. Do it, Cletus, Melinda advised. It's this or prison. Plus, you can write off the corn as a business expense. And the sugar? Cletus asked. For the fermentation starter. Yes, the sugar too, Melinda sighed. Cletus picked up a grease-stained ballpoint pen. He hesitated. Does this mean I'm a sellout? Going corporate? It means you're legit, Cletus, Gumbo said. You're the CEO of McCready Biofuels. Cletus straightened his spine. CEO, he tested the word. I like that. Sounds important. Can I get business cards? You can get a hat, Gumbo promised. Cletus signed the document with a flourish, leaving a thumbprint of oil on the seal of the United States. Agent Williams snatched the paper back immediately, looking like she wanted to sanitize it with fire. Congratulations. You are now part of the system. I expect your first tax payment on the 1st of the month. Do not make me come back here, Mr. McCready. You come back any time, Agent. Cletus grinned, his good mood fully restored. I'll give you the friends and family discount on a tune-up. Your Taurus sounded like it had a little ping in the valves when you drove up. Williams just stared at him. She turned to her colleagues. Let's go. Before I arrest myself for aiding and abetting. The agents packed up their clipboards, their Geiger counters, and their disinfectant sprays. The convoy of government vehicles reversed out of the lot, looking significantly less intimidating than when they arrived. As the dust settled, Mrs. Henderson drove her golf cart up to the group, holding a tray of Jell-O shots. Is it over? She asked. Did we win? We compromised, Gumbo said, grabbing a Jell-O shot. Which is basically winning, but with more paperwork. I'm a CEO. Cletus announced to the gathering crowd of the CKMMAS. We're legal. The government has officially recognized the power of the McCready family recipe. A cheer went up that frightened the pelicans 3 docks over. But remember, Cletus added, shouting over the applause. It ain't for drinking. It's for engines only. That's the federal law. Wink. Beauregard shouted from the back. Yes. Wink. Cletus agreed, enthusiastically. Strictly for engines. Wink. We're going to need a lot more corn, Gumbo said to Melinda, as the line for engine service began to form again, stretching all the way back to the bait shop. And I'm going to need a retainer, Melinda said. Because the moment the IRS figures out he's making a profit, we're going to have a second round of this nightmare. Gumbo looked at the newly legitimate enterprise. Cletus was already sticking, not for human consumption labels onto jars, but he was placing them on the bottom where nobody would read them. Business as usual, Gumbo said. Just with better margins. Chapter 16. The traffic jam started at the turnoff for State Road 24 and extended all the way to the marina's crushed shell parking lot, a snake of chrome, fiberglass, and desperation that would have impressed a hurricane evacuation planner. But these people weren't fleeing a disaster. They were fleeing sobriety and engine knock. Gumbo Malone stood on the roof of the bait shop, watching the invasion through a pair of cheap sunglasses. It was 9 a.m. on a Wednesday, and Cedar Key looked like it was hosting the Super Bowl of redneck yachting. It's beautiful, Eddie Torino said, standing next to him and fanning himself with a stack of deposit slips. And terrifying. I just sold out of ice. Again. I had to send a runner to Gainesville. Who's the runner? Old Man Miller. He took his skiff. He said with the new fuel blend, he can make the round trip in 40 minutes. Miller is going to end up in Georgia, Gumbo predicted. Below them, the marina had transformed. Gone was the sleepy, rusted charm of a forgotten fishing village. In its place was a throbbing, high-octane carnival of commerce. The scent of Cletus's Bio-Solvent, that distinctive perfume of sweet corn, oak, and carburetor cleaner, hung over the town like a heavy, joyous fog. Signs hand-painted on plywood directed the horde. Fuel injection therapy, 2. Intake manifold meditation, 2. Official tasting room, engines only, 2. Gumbo climbed down the ladder and waded into the crowd. It wasn't just locals anymore. The license plates on the trailers told the story. Miami-Dade, Broward, Hillsborough. A tour bus from the villages had just unloaded 40 seniors wearing matching shirts that read, "My other car is a golf cart," and they were currently fighting over who got to hold the funnel. He found Cletus in what used to be the quiet zone of the workshop. It was now the VIP Diagnostic Center. Cletus had undergone a corporate makeover. He was still wearing his grease-stained coveralls, but over them he wore a pristine white lab coat embroidered with CEO and Master Distiller. He also wore a headset that Gumbo was 90% sure wasn't plugged into anything. "Welcome to McCready Biofuels," Cletus shouted over the roar of a cigarette boat engine. "Are you here for the premium flush or the standard detox?" The customer, a man from Miami with a spray tan the color of a Cheeto and gold chains that defied gravity, leaned in. "I hear you got the reserve blend. The stuff aged in the radiator of a '57 Chevy." "Ah, the heritage batch," Cletus nodded sagely, tapping his clipboard. "Very exclusive. High viscosity. Notes of rust and victory. That'll be $200. For the application fee." "Does it come with a sample?" the man whispered. "For quality assurance." "Strictly for the engine," Cletus said, winking so hard his whole face spasmed. "But we do require the owner to verify the aroma profile. Here." He handed the man a mason jar labeled "Warning, Flammable, Delicious." The Miami man took a sip. His eyes widened. He shuddered. Then he pulled a wad of cash from his swim trunks that could have choked a pelican. "Fill her up. And fill me up. Check my fluids." Gumbo grabbed Cletus by the arm and dragged him behind a stack of tires. "Cletus, you're running a speakeasy inside a Jiffy Lube." "I am running a destination experience," Cletus corrected, adjusting his headset. "Look at the customer satisfaction scores, Gumbo. We're trending. A influencer from TikTok just live-streamed me changing a spark plug. She called it industrial chic ASMR." "There is a bachelorette party in the parts department," Gumbo pointed out. "They're interested in marine mechanics." Gumbo looked over the tire stack. Indeed, 6 women wearing bride tribe sashes and tiaras were gathered around Beauregard McCready, who was using a pointer to explain the distillation curve on a whiteboard. "You see," Beauregard rumbled, his voice like rocks tumbling in a dryer, "when the mash hits the thumper, it creates a thermal shock. That's where the flavor, the cleaning power, concentrates. Now, who wants to help me test the output valve?" "Me? Me," screamed the bridesmaids, holding out plastic cups. "It's out of control, Cletus," Gumbo said. "You have a line of boats stretching past the pier. You have tourists drinking solvent out of funnels. You have a tour bus driver who just asked me if the cleaner works on a diesel Greyhound." "Does it?" Cletus asked, interested. "No. It will explode." "We should test that," Cletus mumbled, making a note. "Phase 2, heavy transport." "Focus, CEO," Gumbo snapped. "Success attracts sharks. And I don't mean the ones in the Gulf. I mean the ones with lawyers and competing products." "Let 'em come," Cletus scoffed, waving a hand at the bustling shop. "Nobody has the recipe. Nobody has the crematorium burner. We got the magic, Gumbo. We got the soul." A loud horn blasted from the parking lot. A massive, sleek black SUV with tinted windows was forcing its way through the crowd of intoxicated boaters. It stopped right in front of the bay door, blocking the path of a pontoon boat named Aquaholic. The driver's door opened, and a man stepped out who looked like a villain from a straight-to-DVD movie about evil real estate developers. He wore a linen suit that was too tight, loafers with no socks, and a smile that cost more than Cletus's entire shop. He walked up to Cletus, ignoring the grease and the chaos. "Mr. McCready," the man said, extending a manicured hand. "Sterling Vane. Vane Marine Industries. Fort Lauderdale." Cletus looked at the hand, then at his own oil-soaked glove. He bumped the man with his elbow. "Biohazard protocols. What can I do for you, Mr. Vane? Need a flush?" "I don't need a flush," Vane said, looking around the shop with a mixture of disgust and calculation. "I need to buy you out." The music stopped. The bridesmaids stopped giggling. Beauregard lowered his pointer. Even the Miami guy stopped counting his money. "Buy me out." Cletus laughed. "Son, this is a family business. Established, well, legally about 3 days ago. But spiritually, since 1933. I'm prepared to offer you $2 million, Vane said, his voice carrying over the sudden silence. For the brand, the recipe, and the client list. You take the check, you walk away, and you let professionals handle the distribution. 2 million? Eddie Torino whispered from the doorway, clutching his chest. Cletus looked at the check Vane had produced from his pocket. He looked at the zeros. It was enough money to buy every boat in the marina and still have enough left over to bribe a senator. Then he looked at Mrs. Gable, who was currently sitting in her whaler, happily singing a sea shanty while Beauregard poured cleaner into her intake. He looked at the bachelorette party, learning about physics. He looked at the chaos, the noise, the smell of corn and freedom. $2 million, Cletus mused. That buys a lot of corn. It buys a life of leisure, Vane pressed. No more grease. No more EPA audits. Cletus took the check. He examined it. Then he used it to wipe a smudge of oil off his dipstick. Sorry, Mr. Vane. Cletus handed the ruined check back. But I think you misunderstood the nature of this enterprise. We ain't just selling fluid. We're selling a lifestyle. And frankly, you look like a man who prefers his engines sober. The crowd erupted. The bridesmaids cheered. Old Man Miller, who had apparently returned from his speed run to Gainesville, fired a flare gun into the air in celebration. Vane stared at the oily smear on his check. His smile vanished, replaced by a look of cold, reptile malice. You're making a mistake, McCready, Vane said softly. The market corrects inefficiencies. And you are very inefficient. Maybe, Cletus grinned. But I got great mileage. Vane turned and walked back to his SUV. As he drove away, Gumbo noticed the license plate, Disrupt. That guy, Gumbo said to Cletus, is going to be a problem. He's just jealous, Cletus dismissed, turning back to his adoring public. All right, folks. Who's next? We just opened a fresh barrel of the high-mileage blend. It's got a kick like a mule in a disco. As the party restarted, Gumbo watched the black SUV disappear down the road. Cletus had won the crowd, but he had just declared war on corporate America. Beauregard, Gumbo said to the giant man, you might want to double the security on the corn supply. Way ahead of you, Beauregard grunted, patting a bulge in his overalls that was definitely not a wrench. And I let the alligator out of his pen. He's patrolling the perimeter. Good, Gumbo said. Because I think the sharks just smelled blood in the water. He grabbed a plastic cup from a passing bridesmaid. Is this the reserve blend? Gumbo asked. It's for the carburetor, she giggled. Right, Gumbo said, taking a sip. Diagnostic check. Complete. Chapter 17. The tour bus from Orlando had Golden Years Adventure Charters stenciled on the side, but as it idled in the marina lot, it looked more like a troop transport deploying reinforcements for the war on liver function. Gumbo stood near the ticket booth, formerly a bait shack, now painted with a mural of a carburetor sprouting angel wings, and watched the line of seniors adjusting their safety goggles. They were each clutching a waiver that absolved McCready Biofuels of liability for dizziness, euphoria, spontaneous shanty singing, or the sudden urge to buy a timeshare. Ladies and gentlemen, Eddie Torino bellowed into a megaphone, wearing a captain's hat that was at least 2 sizes too big. Welcome to the internal combustion immersion experience. Please keep your hands inside the vehicle at all times, and remember, what happens in the intake manifold stays in the intake manifold. This is perverse, Gumbo noted, watching a grandmother from the villages strap on a plastic hard hat. It's educational, Cletus corrected. He was standing beside Gumbo, checking his reflection in the side of a chrome-plated fuel drum. He had upgraded his wardrobe again. The lab coat was gone, replaced by a tuxedo t-shirt and a pair of oil-resistant dress shoes. They're here to learn about the miracle of high-efficiency solvents. They're here to drink the solvent, Cletus. They are here to assist in quality control, Cletus sniffed. We can't just pour the byproduct into the marsh. That would be irresponsible. These fine citizens are biological filters. The group shuffled toward the workshop, which had been retrofitted with bleachers. Beauregard stood by the still, now labeled thermodynamic reaction chamber, holding a pointer and looking like a physics professor who wrestled bears on the weekends. Observe, Beauregard roared, slapping the copper tank. The extraction of hydrocarbons. When the mash hits the heat, the impurities rise. We must purge the system. Purge the system, the crowd chanted back, holding out their souvenir shot glasses, which were actually small measuring cups. Beauregard opened a valve. The crystal-clear liquid flowed. The crowd cheered. It's a cult, Gumbo said. You've started a mechanical cult. It's a movement, Cletus said. And speaking of movements, here comes the delegation. A convoy of sensible white sedans pulled into the lot, weaving through the golf carts. They parked in formation. 4 men stepped out, wearing matching blue polo shirts with the embroidered logo of a wrench crossed with a clipboard. They carried briefcases, and the grim determination of people who knew the part number for everything but the price of nothing. The Florida Marine Mechanics Association, Cletus whispered. The High Council of Torque. The leader of the group was a man named Roger Gasket. Gumbo assumed that wasn't his real name, until he saw the name tag, R. Gasket, President. He had a buzz cut, a pocket protector, and a tan that stopped abruptly at his neck. Mr. McCready, Roger said, marching up to the ticket booth. We have received disturbing reports regarding your methodology. Disturbing? Cletus asked, insulted. My customer satisfaction is 100%. My Yelp page is fire. Literally. Someone posted a video of their exhaust pipe shooting blue flames. That is exactly the issue, Roger said, tapping his briefcase. Standard marine protocols do not account for blue flames or exhaust that smells like a bakery. The association is here to conduct a peer review. We need to verify that your swamp Appalachian protocol meets the ISO 9001 standards for solvent viscosity. You want to steal the recipe, Gumbo translated. Roger bristled. We want to codify the innovation. If this fluid is indeed increasing engine longevity, it must be standardized. We cannot have rogue mechanics pouring agricultural runoff into certified vessels. Come on in, fellas. Cletus waved them forward with the magnanimity of a king welcoming peasants. But you'll need safety gear. The fumes in the VIP section are dense. Gumbo followed the delegation into the workshop. The atmosphere inside was a unique blend of church service and pit crew panic. On the bleachers, the tour group was watching Beauregard perform an oil change on a 1985 Johnson outboard with the reverence usually reserved for open-heart surgery. Notice the sludge. Beauregard shouted, holding up a drain pan. This is the enemy. But with the McCready treatment. He poured a gallon of the 180-proof solvent into the top of the engine. He pulled the starter cord. The engine didn't just start, it sang. It roared a harmonious, throaty baritone that vibrated the sheet metal roof. A cloud of sweet, boozy vapor blasted out of the test tank, enveloping the front row of tourists. Ooh, squealed the grandmother from the villages. I can taste the horsepower. Roger Gasket pulled a spectrometer from his briefcase. He stuck the probe into the exhaust plume. He looked at the reading. He frowned. He tapped the machine. He looked again. Impossible, Roger muttered. Hydrocarbons are near zero. Carbon monoxide, negligible. It's emitting water vapor and joy. That's the limonene, Cletus whispered. And the love. Mr. McCready, Roger said, his voice trembling slightly. This efficiency rating is anomalous. It defies the laws of thermodynamics. It ain't physics, Beauregard grunted, stepping down from the podium and handing Roger a mason jar. It's chemistry. Try the byproduct. For science. Roger hesitated. He looked at his colleagues. They nodded, their eyes fixed on the clear liquid swirling in the jar. Strictly for analysis, Roger stated. He took a sip. The effect was instantaneous. Roger's rigid posture relaxed. His pocket protector seemed to sag. A smile, foreign and terrified, broke across his face. Notes of toasted oak, Roger whispered. High lubricity. Low friction coefficient. He took another, larger gulp. Gentlemen, I believe we are looking at the future of marine maintenance. I feel very maintained, one of his colleagues giggled, loosening his tie. I want to see the schematic, Roger demanded, but his voice lacked its earlier edge. Show me the reflux capacitor. I want to touch the worm. Gumbo watched as the Florida Marine Mechanics Association dissolved into the general chaos of the tour group. Within 10 minutes, Roger Gasket was wearing a souvenir hard hat and explaining the principles of internal combustion to a woman holding a dachshund while simultaneously drinking solvent out of a funnel. They're neutralized, Gumbo said to Cletus. They're integrated, Cletus corrected. They're gonna accredit me, Gumbo. I'm gonna be the gold standard. The McCready method will be taught in trade schools. Just don't let them drive home, Gumbo advised. I don't think I was testing engine fluid defense works on the highway patrol. Outside, the marina was evolving again. A new sign was being hoisted onto a pontoon boat. Sunset intake flush cruises, minus $49.99 includes souvenir dipstick. Eddie Torino ran up, looking panicked but wealthy. Gumbo. We have a problem. Did we run out of corn? No. We have a copycat. A customer just came in saying Snake Davidson is handing out flyers for a super premium tour. Snake? Gumbo frowned. I thought he blew himself up. He's back. And he's undercut our prices. He's offering a double-strength flush for half the price. Double strength? Cletus asked, horrified. That's irresponsible. You can't just double the proof. It'll melt the fuel lines. It's not the proof I'm worried about, Gumbo said, looking toward the swamp where Snake's shack lay hidden in the mangroves. It's what he's cutting it with this time. If he poisoned people with turpentine last week, God knows what he's using for super premium. Roger Gasket stumbled over, swaying slightly. Did someone say, competition? The association, Hick, takes a dim view of unauthorized solvents. Roger, Gumbo said, putting an arm around the intoxicated bureaucrat. How would you like to conduct a field audit? Roger's eyes narrowed, focusing with drunken intensity. An audit? With extreme prejudice? The extremist, Gumbo promised. Load the van, Roger commanded his team, waving a half-empty jar. We ride at dawn. Or whenever the room stops spinning. Gumbo watched the mechanics pile back into their sensible sedans, now armed with the righteous indignation of the convert. Cletus's operation had survived the feds, the EPA, and the health department. Now, it had an army of drunken, certified mechanics ready to defend the purity of the brew. This is going to get messy, Gumbo sighed. But it'll run smooth, Cletus said, clinking his jar against Gumbo's shoulder. Real smooth. Chapter 18. The illicit laboratory of Snake Davidson was located in a stilt shack deep within the mangroves, a place where the mosquitoes were large enough to file flight plans and the water smelled of sulfur and bad intentions. Snake stood over a plastic 50-gallon drum that had originally held pool chlorine. He was stirring a mixture that was the color of a bruised plum and hissed aggressively when the spoon touched the side. It needs more kick, Snake muttered, wiping a sheen of chemical sweat from his forehead with a rag that was arguably dirtier than his face. Sterling Vane, the CEO of Vane Marine Industries, stood near the door, trying desperately not to touch anything. He was wearing a suit that cost more than Snake's entire zip code, and he looked at the swamp mechanic with the disdain a sanitation worker reserves for a particularly leaking bag of garbage. "It does not need more kick, Mr. Davidson," Vane said, his voice smooth and cold. "It needs volume. I have a tanker truck of industrial-grade ethanol sitting on the highway. It was rejected by a hand sanitizer factory in Jersey for being too caustic. It is perfect." "Is it corn-based?" Snake asked, adding a splash of radiator fluid to the drum. "The locals like the corn taste." "It is biomass adjacent," Vane lied effortlessly. "It is 190 proof grain alcohol, denatured with a proprietary blend of bittering agents and methanol. It costs 40 cents a gallon." 40 cents. Snake whistled, revealing a gum line that had receded like the tide. "Cletus is paying $4 for corn. We're going to crush him." "We are going to obliterate him," Vane corrected. "We will flood the market. We will offer a product that is half the price and twice the potency. We call it Vane's Vitality Formula. Or for your local clientele, Snake's Super Juice." "I like Super Juice," Snake grinned. "I added some blue food coloring to make it look premium, and a little bit of peppermint schnapps I found in a dumpster for the finish." Vane watched a bubble of purple sludge rise to the surface of the drum and burst with an audible pop, releasing a vapor that caused a gecko on the wall to lose its grip and fall to the floor, twitching. "Excellent," Vane said, checking his Rolex. "Bottling begins in an hour. I want distribution channels open by noon. Every bait shop, every fuel dock, every desperate tourist with an overheating engine. We bury McCready by sunset." By 1 p.m., the Moon Shine Marina was facing its first recession. Gumbo Malone sat on the cooler in front of the bait shop, watching the defectors. A line of boats that usually queued up for Cletus's Bio-Solvent was peeling off, heading toward a makeshift floating kiosk anchored near the channel marker. The kiosk was a pontoon boat painted neon green, manned by Snake Davidson and a team of guys who looked like they'd been recruited from a prison rodeo. A banner flapped in the breeze, "Super Juice, 200 proof performance. $20 a flush." "They're undercutting us," Eddie Torino groaned, watching through binoculars. $20. Cletus charges 60. "It's simple economics, Gumbo. People are cheap." "People are stupid," Gumbo corrected. "Look at the smoke." He pointed to a center console that had just received the snake treatment. As it pulled away from the kiosk, the engine didn't purr. It didn't sing. It emitted a sound like a garbage disposal chewing on a bag of wrenches, followed by a plume of thick, acrid smoke that hung over the water like a chemical weapon. "That doesn't look like steam," Eddie noted. "That looks like the engine is digesting its own pistons," Gumbo said. A tourist walked past them, carrying a plastic gallon jug filled with purple liquid. He looked pale. He was sweating profusely, and his eyes were vibrating. "Hey buddy," Gumbo called out. "You okay?" The tourist stopped. He swayed. He looked at Gumbo with pupils the size of dinner plates. "The lizards," the tourist whispered. "They have clipboards. They're auditing my soul." "Did you drink the engine cleaner?" Gumbo asked gently. "It tasted like burning Christmas," the tourist wheezed. Then he hiccuped, burped a cloud of peppermint-scented poison, and collapsed into a pile of crab traps. "Eddie," Gumbo said, standing up. "Call Dr. Vance. Tell her we have a toxicity event. I'm going to inspect the competition." Gumbo took his skiff out to the floating kiosk. The scene was chaotic. Snake Davidson was operating a high-speed pump, blasting purple sludge into the fuel tank of a pristine Viking yacht owned by a man who was currently arguing with a pelican. "Fill her up," Snake yelled, manic energy radiating off him. "Double dose. Cleans the valves. Cleans the conscience." "Snake," Gumbo shouted, tying off his skiff. "Shut it down." Snake looked up, his eyes wild. "Malone, you're just in time. Want a sample? It's got electrolytes. It's got what plants crave. It's got methanol, Snake, Gumbo said, stepping onto the pontoon. The smell was overpowering, a mix of cheap vodka, mint, and burning rubber. You're blinding people. And you're melting their fuel lines. Lies. Snake shrieked. This is Vane Industries technology. Top secret. Look at the viscosity. He pointed to the yacht. The owner turned the key. The Viking's massive diesel engines turned over. Ka-chunk. Ka-chunk. WRRRRR bang. A fireball the size of a beach ball erupted from the exhaust port. The engine cowling blew off, landing in the water with a hiss. Black oil sprayed across the pristine white deck, coating the owner, who stopped arguing with the pelican, to scream. See. Snake yelled over the alarm bells. That's raw power. The engine is shedding its weak parts. It threw a rod, Snake. Gumbo grabbed the nozzle from Snake's hand. You're destroying the fleet. I'm disrupting the industry, a voice boomed from the upper deck of the pontoon. Sterling Vane stepped to the railing, looking impeccable despite the chaos. He held a glass of mineral water. Mr. Malone, Vane said smoothly. Always a pleasure. I see you've noticed our aggressive market entry. I noticed you're poisoning tourists, Gumbo said. What is in this slop, Vane? Paint thinner? Industrial surplus, Vane corrected. It creates a very high thermal event. If the engines aren't robust enough to handle the Vane standard, that is hardly my fault. It's planned obsolescence. We sell the fuel that breaks the engine, then we sell them the new engine. It's the circle of profit. It's fraud, Gumbo said. It's capitalism, Vane sneered. And look around. They love it. Gumbo looked. Despite the explosion on the Viking, 3 more boats were pulling up. The owners, drawn by the low price and the promise of a 200-proof kick, were ignoring the debris field. One super juice, please, a guy in a pontoon shouted. And make it a double. My wife wants to see the sound colors again. You see. Vane smiled. McCready offers a gentle artisanal buzz. We offer oblivion. At a discount. Gumbo watched the pontoon owner take a swig from the nozzle before putting it in his tank. The man immediately grabbed his throat, turned a shade of green usually reserved for cartoon aliens, and fell backward into his cooler. He's fine. Snake reassured the wife. That's just the impurities leaving the body. Gumbo backed away. He couldn't fight this with logic. He couldn't fight it with the law. Vane had lawyers who ate ATF agents for breakfast. He needed to fight it with the one thing Florida respected above all else, a spectacle. He jumped back into his skiff and gunned the engine, which, thanks to Cletus's formula, purred like a contented jaguar. He raced back to McCready Marine. Cletus was sitting on a bucket, looking despondent as he watched his customers defect to the neon green kiosk of doom. It's over, Gumbo, Cletus sighed. They want the cheap stuff. They want the burn. They don't know the difference, Cletus, Gumbo said, grabbing the mechanic by his tuxedo t-shirt. They think all moonshine is created equal. We have to show them. Show them what? That my stuff doesn't make you blind? Exactly. We need a Pepsi challenge. But with combustion engines. Gumbo pulled out his phone. I'm calling the mayor. I'm calling the fire department. And I'm calling Dr. Vance. What are we gonna do? We are going to host a drag race, Gumbo declared. Tomorrow. High noon. The McCready Bio-Solvent versus Snake's Super Juice. Winner takes the marina. Loser leaves town. And if we lose? Cletus asked nervously. If we lose, Gumbo said, watching another cloud of black smoke rise from the channel, there won't be a town left. Just a crater smelling of peppermint schnapps. I hate peppermint, Cletus grumbled, standing up. Let's brew the high-octane batch. The one Granddaddy used to outrun the cops. The 33 blend. The 33 blend, Cletus nodded grimly. Double distilled. Aged in oak. Filtered through a loaf of sourdough bread. Sourdough? Don't ask, Cletus said, heading for the still. It's science. Gumbo looked back at the floating kiosk, where Sterling Vane was currently counting money while Snake tried to put out a small fire on a jet ski with a bucket of purple alcohol, which naturally only made the fire angrier. Enjoy the profits while you can, Vane, Gumbo muttered. Because tomorrow, we're gonna see whose fuel actually burns clean. Chapter 19. High noon in Cedar Key didn't just bring heat. It brought a humidity so aggressive it felt like being hugged by a wet bear. The sun hammered down on the crushed shell parking lot, baking the gathered crowd of retirees, tourists, and sunburned mechanics who had assembled for the great Cedar Key combustion showdown. Gumbo Malone stood on the end of the pier, sweating through his second-best Hawaiian shirt. Beside him, Mayor Bob Big Fish Johnson adjusted a megaphone that was feeding back with a squeal usually reserved for dying pigs. Testing, the mayor bellowed, startling a pelican off a channel marker. Is this thing on? Welcome, citizens and potential voters, to the first and hopefully last Bio-Solvent drag race. The crowd roared. The Cedar Key Marine Mechanics Appreciation Society, CKMMAS, occupied the prime viewing spots on the seawall, armed with coolers and foam fingers that read Team Corn. Mrs. Henderson was taking bets using a notebook she usually reserved for bridge scores. In the left lane, the mayor announced, gesturing to a battered 1994 Carolina skiff that looked like it had survived 3 hurricanes and a divorce, we have Cletus McCready piloting the Spirit of Starch. Cletus stood in the center console, wearing his tuxedo t-shirt and a crash helmet painted to look like a watermelon. He revved the engine, a vintage Mercury 200, that had been polished until it gleamed like a diamond in a coal mine. It didn't roar, it hummed a low, threatening B-flat. And in the right lane, the mayor continued, his voice dripping with skepticism, we have Snake Davidson in that thing. Snake's vessel was a sleek, needle-nosed racing hull named the Disruptor. It was painted a violent shade of purple to match his product and sponsored by Vane Marine Industries. Snake sat in the cockpit wearing racing goggles and a fire-retardant suit that was 3 sizes too big, making him look like a deflated astronaut. Standing on the dock next to Snake was Sterling Vane, looking cool in white linen and holding a bottle of super juice like a weapon. Gentlemen, Gumbo shouted, stepping forward to officiate. The rules are simple. 1 lap around Atsina Oti Key and back. First engine to cross the finish line or survive the trip wins exclusive rights to the marina fuel concession. Prepare to eat my wake, McCready. Snake yelled, dumping a gallon of purple sludge into his tank. This is 200-proof innovation. It smells like a candy cane factory on fire, Cletus observed calmly, carefully pouring a mason jar of his clear golden 33 blend into his own intake. Better check your seals, Snake. That much methanol eats rubber like a rat on cheese. Shut up. Snake slammed his fuel cap shut. Fire it up. Snake turned the key. The Disruptor's engine cranked with a sound like a bag of silverware being thrown down a staircase. Clack bang wheeze. Then it caught. A plume of violet smoke erupted from the exhaust, smelling intensely of burning peppermint and bad decisions. Cletus turned his key. His engine responded instantly, a smooth, throaty purr that vibrated the dock pilings. It sounded confident. It sounded like a jazz musician hitting the perfect note. On my mark. Gumbo raised a flare gun. 3, 2, 1. Pop. The red flare arced into the sky. Cletus slammed the throttle. The Spirit of Starch didn't just accelerate, it leapt. The bow rose, the prop bit into the water, and the skiff shot forward on a plane of pure corn-fed torque. The exhaust was clean, invisible, leaving only the faint, sweet scent of baking biscuits in its wake. Snake punched it a second later. The Disruptor lurched forward, shuddering violently. The engine screamed, a high-pitched mechanical shriek that set teeth on edge 3 counties away. Blue flames licked from the exhaust ports. "Look at that power!" Vane shouted to the crowd. "That is the sound of dominance. That is the sound of a piston trying to escape," Beauregard McCready rumbled, watching from the fuel dock with a stopwatch. Out on the water, the boats tore across the chop. Cletus was holding a steady lead, his old skiff skimming the waves with impossible grace. The engine was running so cool, Gumbo could see Cletus checking his watch and waving to a passing dolphin. Snake, however, was in trouble. The disruptor was porpoising wildly, bouncing off the water like a skipped stone. The purple smoke trail had turned black. "He's overheating," Dr. Vance noted, peering through a surveyor's transit she had set up on a tripod. "I'm reading a thermal spike of, oh my, 400 degrees. The cylinder heads are melting." "Is that bad?" the mayor asked. "It's spectacular," Vance grinned. As they rounded the key and headed back for the straightaway, the difference became undeniable. Cletus was cruising, the 33 blend providing a perfect clean burn. Snake was fighting a war against physics. Then it happened. Just as Snake tried to push the throttle for a final burst of speed, a sound echoed across the water that sounded like a cannon shot inside a dumpster. Kaboom! The engine cowling of the disruptor blew sky-high, cartwheeling into the air. A massive fireball, tinged a festive holiday green due to the copper salts and the cheap alcohol, erupted from the stern. Snake, realizing his super juice had become an external combustion event, bailed out. He dove into the Gulf, just as the boat's transom disintegrated into a cloud of fiberglass confetti and burning peppermint oil. "And there goes the warranty," Gumbo noted dryly. Cletus crossed the finish line a full minute later, throttling down to a gentle idle. He circled back, expertly maneuvering his skiff to pick up the wet, sputtering form of Snake Davidson. The crowd on the dock went feral. The CKMMAS threw their hats in the air. Mrs. Henderson started collecting on bets with ruthless efficiency. "Fraud!" Sterling Vane screamed, his composure finally cracking as he watched his investment burn to the waterline. "Sabotage!" "He rigged the water." "He didn't rig anything," Beauregard said, stepping in front of Vane and crossing his massive arms. "Physics did. Your juice burns too hot, son. It ain't got no soul. No lubrication." Gumbo walked over to the edge of the dock as Cletus pulled up. Snake was sitting in the bow of the Spirit of Starch, looking like a drowned rat marinated in schnapps. "You okay, Snake?" Gumbo asked. Snake coughed up a liter of seawater. It was fast," he wheezed. "For about 3 seconds. I saw the face of God." He looked angry. "That was the piston hitting your helmet," Cletus explained kindly, handing Snake a towel. Sterling Vane stormed over to the edge of the dock. "This proves nothing. A mechanical failure. An anomaly." "An anomaly?" Dr. Vance stepped forward, holding a printout from a portable air quality monitor. "Mr. Vane, your boat just released enough toxic particulate matter to kill a coral reef. Meanwhile, Mr. McCready's exhaust actually improved the local air quality index. His engine is scrubbing the atmosphere. It's a carbon-negative victory," the mayor declared. "By the power vested in me, I declare McCready Biofuels the official, exclusive provider of marine solvents for the city of Cedar Key." The crowd cheered. Vane looked around at the sea of hostile faces, the victorious mechanic, and the sinking remains of his prototype. He realized that no amount of corporate buzzwords could fix a public explosion. "This isn't over," Vane spat, adjusting his linen jacket. "I have lawyers. I have patents. And you have a ride home to catch," Gumbo said, pointing to the parking lot. "Because I don't think anyone here is going to sell you gas. Or engine cleaner." Vane sneered, turned on his heel, and marched toward his SUV. But as he reached for the door handle, he paused. A large, three-legged dog, Snake's dog Tripod, was currently lifting his leg on Vane's rear tire. The crowd laughed. Vane got in and peeled out, his exit significantly less dignified than his entrance. Cletus climbed onto the dock, removing his watermelon helmet. He looked at Gumbo, then at the smoking wreck of the competition. "Did we win?" Cletus asked. "You won," Gumbo said, clapping him on the shoulder. "Proof of concept complete. Now, do you have any of that 33 blend left? I think the judges need a debriefing." "I saved a jar," Cletus winked. "Stored it in the live well. For temperature control." As the celebration moved toward the tiki bar, Gumbo looked out at the water. The disruptor hissed as it finally slipped beneath the surface, leaving behind only a few bubbles and the smell of a candy cane dying a violent death. Science had prevailed. So had corn. And in Florida, that was about as good as a happy ending got.